My son was supposed to be in a private clinic for 5 years, or so I believed. Every December I sent his wife $30,000, money I earned with my own hands, money I sent without missing a year, because I thought I was helping my son recover. Then one afternoon at the zoo, my 8-year-old grandson grabbed my sleeve, looked over both shoulders and whispered, "Grandpa, stop paying Mom. Dad isn't at the clinic. Dad is behind the blue door. And when the yellow bell rings, he has to be quiet." I remember just staring at him. Because children do not whisper like that unless fear has taught them how. And they do not talk about their father like he is some secret hidden behind the house unless something is deeply wrong. That was the moment everything I believed started to crack. Because if my grandson was telling the truth, then my son was never really gone. He was close. Close enough to hear his own child. Close enough to be hidden behind a door while I kept paying for the lie. And once you hear something like that, you cannot go back to polite explanations. You cannot go back to invoices. You cannot go back to treatment updates. You cannot go back to telling yourself everything makes sense. You either start looking closer, or you accept that you chose not to. Before this story is over, I'm going to tell you how I found my son locked inside a room behind his own house, how guilt got turned into a business, and why a little yellow bell became one of the ugliest sounds I've ever heard. My name is Thomas Reed. I'm 69 years old. I live in a small town in Pennsylvania where people still give directions using old gas stations, churches, and trees that are not even there anymore. I own Reed Auto and Tire on Mason Street, or maybe I should say I still own it. My father started that shop when I was a kid. One bay, one lift, one desk, one old heater that made more noise than warmth in the winter. I took it over after he retired, expanded it, added 2 more bays, put in a waiting area, bought a coffee machine that should have died years ago but never got the message. My life made sense to me. Not glamorous, not exciting, but solid. A good wife, 1 son, a business that kept the lights on, a mortgage that got paid, taxes paid, dinner at home most nights. The kind of life that looks too ordinary to break in some dramatic way. That is the lie ordinary lives tell. They break too. Sometimes worse. Because when something strange happens in an ordinary life, you are not ready for it. You expect bills, back pain, hospital visits, maybe one dishonest contractor. You do not expect a family lie so twisted it can swallow years of your life without making enough noise. My wife Evelyn used to say men like me mistake routine for control. She was smarter than I was. She knew it too. She taught 3rd grade for 27 years. And somehow, after spending all day with 8-year-olds, she still came home with enough patience to listen to me explain why older Hondas were built better than most of the overpriced garbage sold by people in polished shoes. She had this habit of stirring her tea long after the sugar dissolved, like she needed motion to think. On winter nights, she would stand at the kitchen counter in thick socks and one of my old sweatshirts, staring out the window and stirring tea that did not need stirring anymore. I loved that about her, still do. She died 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, fast, cruel, uninterested in fairness. By the time the doctor said terminal, I already knew it in my bones. You see it before they name it. The weight loss, the exhaustion, the way hope starts sounding more professional than real. We got 9 months. 9 months of appointments, scans, careful language, casseroles from neighbors, people saying strong things because they do not know what else to say. 9 months of trying to rearrange life around something that was not interested in compromise. She died believing our son was getting help. That matters more than I can explain. Because if she had known the truth, I do not know what it would have done to her. Maybe fury would have kept her alive longer. Maybe heartbreak would have killed her even faster. I honestly do not know. And that not knowing still sits with me. Our son Owen was 33 when all this started. Quiet kid. Good hands. Better with engines than people when he was young. Not antisocial. Just inward. He was the kind of boy who would disappear into the garage for 3 hours fixing something nobody asked him to fix, then come in smelling like oil and cold air right when dinner hit the table. When he was 12, he started helping me at the shop on Saturdays. By 15, he could diagnose half the nonsense customers described badly. Someone would say, "It makes a weird sound when I brake." And he would already be narrowing it down in his head. Rotor, caliper, wheel bearing, or the customer was just terrible at describing life. He had Evelyn's eyes and my stubbornness. That is not the kindest combination to give a child, but it can make a steady man if life does not hit him sideways too early. And Owen was steady. No arrests, no drinking problem, no dramatic phases, no disappearing acts. He dated some in college, studied construction management, got licensed, started working faster than most men his age. By 29, he was married, had bought a house, and had a son. From the outside, it looked clean, like a continuation of everything Evelyn and I had built. Then there was Claire. She was harder to read, not because she was openly cold, that would have been simple. No, Claire was polished, organized, controlled. The kind of woman who remembered birthdays, sent thank you cards, hosted neat dinners, and always seemed just reasonable enough to make you feel crude for questioning her. Evelyn saw it before I did. One Thanksgiving, years before any of this, she said to me while we were loading the dishwasher, "She's always performing being reasonable." I laughed, said she was overthinking. She wasn't. That is the ugly thing about hindsight. It takes instincts you ignored and turns them into accusations later. When Eli was born, I trusted Claire more. Probably because grandfathers are easy marks once a child is involved. Eli had Owen's eyes, though lighter, Claire's chin, and this funny little serious face he made as a baby, like he had just walked into a meeting already disappointed. Evelyn adored him instantly. She knitted him a yellow sweater he wore exactly once before throwing up on it. She laughed for days and said he had inherited my disrespect for craftsmanship. We were not a dramatic family. That matters. No screaming holidays, no dramatic betrayals, no missing inheritance fights, nothing that would have prepared me for what came later. The story Claire gave me began with a work accident. 5 years before that day at the zoo, Owen was managing a commercial construction job outside Scranton. Concrete skeleton, steel deliveries, rain all week, pressure from above. Anybody who has been around job sites knows what that combination does. Weather and deadlines can make smart men careless. Claire called me one Thursday night just after I closed the shop. Her voice was controlled. Too controlled. Real panic sounds messy. Claire sounded rehearsed by fear. She said there had been an accident. A steel member shifted during a lift. A subcontractor got badly hurt. Owen had not been physically injured but had not handled it well. That was the phrase she used. Not handled it well. I drove to their house that night. Owen was sitting at the kitchen table with both elbows on his knees and his hands hanging between them like they were no longer connected to the rest of him. He looked up when I walked in, but it took him a second to place my face. That unsettled me more than I admitted at the time. "Son," I said. He blinked, nodded once, then looked back at the floor. Claire explained the rest. The worker survived surgery, but the scene had been bad. Blood, shouting, ambulance, investigation. A lot of questions, a lot of pressure. Owen kept saying he should have stopped the lift sooner. Should have watched the line angle, should have checked the rigging himself, should have seen it coming. The next week he stopped going to work. The week after that, he stopped sleeping. The week after that, Claire said he had a panic episode so bad he threw up in the driveway because a garbage truck dropped a dumpster too hard near the curb. I saw some of it myself. One afternoon I brought over soup because Evelyn believed soup was useful in every emergency, except maybe house fires. I found Owen sitting on the laundry room floor with both hands over his ears, breathing too fast, while Claire stood there telling me not to come any closer because sudden presence could escalate him. That sentence bothered me even then. Sudden presence. Who talks like that about her husband unless someone taught her how? A few days later she introduced Dr. Marcus Vale. I remember the first time he sat in my living room. Navy suit, no tie, good watch, shoes too clean for February, voice soft enough to feel expensive. He talked to me like a man giving a lecture to the only student who had not done the reading. Not rude, just polished. He said Owen was experiencing severe guilt fixation and functional destabilization. He said a home setting could trap a patient inside shame loops. He said family love can accidentally become pressure. He said structured separation often creates the best environment for recovery. Then he looked at Evelyn and me and said, "If you really want him back, you have to stop trying to pull him toward who he used to be." That sounded wise at the time. A lot of dangerous things do when they are said slowly enough by somebody with credentials. Claire cried once during that conversation. Not an ugly cry, not a breakdown. Just one clean tear she wiped away quickly while saying, "I just want my husband back." That line worked on me. It worked because it sounded exactly like what a loving wife would say. I did not understand yet that some people know exactly how much emotion to use. Too little looks cold, too much looks fake. Claire always landed right in the profitable middle. Marcus recommended a private program, quiet, controlled, out of county. He never really sold me a place. He sold me a concept. Distance, stability, expert care, no family interference, no emotional disruption. The clinic was expensive, of course it was. Insurance would not cover enough. Claire and Owen had some savings, but nowhere near what was needed. So I wrote the first check, $20,000. I remember the number because my hand shook when I signed it. I remember tapping on Claire's SUV window before they left. I remember Owen rolling it halfway down. I remember saying, "Get well," because when men do not know how to handle grief, we become greeting cards. He nodded once. That was the last time I saw my son for months. After that, everything came through Claire. He had a rough week, then a hopeful week, then a setback, then a breakthrough, then a low stimulation period where visits would be harmful, then progress too fragile for outside contact. Every time I asked to see him, the answer shifted just enough to make me feel guilty for asking. Not yet. He's fragile. It could set him back. Marcus says short-term pain now means long-term recovery later. That is how manipulation survives. Not with impossible lies, with emotionally expensive lies. Lies that make you feel selfish for asking ordinary questions. Evelyn pushed harder than I did. She wanted one supervised visit after the first 3 months. Said mothers do not become contaminants because a doctor says so. Claire refused. Marcus backed her. Said Owen's progress was still too dependent on controlled conditions. Evelyn did not buy it. Then she got sick. At first she hid how sick, called it stress, then stomach trouble, then fatigue, then finally the truth. Once cancer enters a family, your priorities get simple fast. Appointments, medication, food they can keep down, good days, less bad days, hours that feel normal enough to save. Somewhere in that blur, Owen's absence shifted from emergency to managed grief. Claire still sent updates. Marcus still sent short summaries. I still paid, not every month, but enough. By the time Evelyn could not walk upstairs without stopping twice, she asked me one thing about Owen. We were in bed. Window cracked, rain outside, one lamp on. She turned her head toward me and said, "Do you believe them?" I should have answered carefully. I should have admitted the doubt I already had. I should have respected that my wife saw through people faster than I ever did. Instead, I said, "I believe they're trying." That answer satisfied the room for the night. Not because she agreed. Because she was too tired to fight me and the disease at the same time. She died 4 months later. At the funeral, Claire wore gray and held Eli's hand. Owen was absent, of course. Marcus had advised against major emotional exposure. Some people at the reception asked where Owen was. I told them the story exactly as I had been told. Private clinic, still recovering, not strong enough for crowds. Please keep him in your prayers. The first year after Evelyn died, the money changed shape. At first it felt like support. Then it became obligation. Part guilt, part habit. Part fear that if I stopped sending it, I would somehow be abandoning my son twice. Claire did not ask every month, but every big request came wrapped in the same language. Medication changes, extended supervision, uncovered therapies, supplemental care, insurance gap, administrative continuity. Then Marcus said Owen had transitioned into a more sustainable recovery model. Not inpatient anymore. Supervised private recovery environment. That should have made me ask more questions. Instead, I translated it into something softer in my own mind. A managed residence, a quiet place, professional oversight, maybe staff, maybe a garden, maybe some schedule taped to a wall. I had no idea the private setting was a room behind my grandson's own house. That first December after the transition, I sent $30,000. Claire said a yearly support transfer was easier, cleaner, less emotionally disruptive than constant asks. That sounded reasonable. That was the problem. Everything always sounded reasonable. So every December I paid, 1 year early because of staffing problems, 1 year in 2 pieces because of an observation extension, 1 year in late November because Eli's school paperwork had supposedly created stress that might destabilize Owen. There is almost no limit to what a worried father will pay for if you attach the right medical words to it. Meanwhile, Eli kept growing. That is the part adults always forget. Children keep moving forward no matter how badly the adults around them lie. He lost teeth, started school, learned to read, drew trucks that looked like accidents on paper, and every now and then he would say something about Dad that felt off, not screaming red flags, just off. Dad likes when it rains. Dad says the blue room gets colder in winter. Mom says not to tell him too much because it makes him miss stuff. I heard those things and bent them into the story I already believed. Supervised calls, controlled visits, therapeutic distance. That is another thing lies do. They make you do half the work. By the time we got to that day at the zoo, I had been paying for 5 years. 5 years of money. 5 years of updates. 5 years of choosing the version of reality that hurt less to question. That Saturday started so normally it still makes me angry. I picked Eli up around 10. He wanted the zoo because the otters had been acting criminal the last time, and he wanted to see if they had improved. I told him real criminals rarely improve on schedule. He laughed so hard, milk came out of his nose from the shake. He should not have had that early. Cool air, blue sky, families everywhere, strollers, balloons, pretzels, damp leaves. For the first hour, it was normal, completely normal. Then little things started feeling wrong. At the reptile house, he held my hand tighter than usual. At the penguins, he looked behind us twice. At lunch, he barely touched his food. I asked if he felt sick. He shook his head. I asked if he was tired. He shook his head again. Then, sitting near a map stand with a sticky lemonade cup in his hands, he leaned in and whispered, "Grandpa, stop paying Mom. Dad isn't at the clinic. Dad is behind the blue door." I remember everything around that sentence. His untied shoelace. The smell of sunscreen from somebody standing too close. A peacock screaming somewhere behind us, the crease between his eyebrows. I turned to him and said, "What did you say?" He looked down and whispered, "Please don't say it loud." "Who told you that?" No answer. "Did your mom say that?" He shook his head hard. Then he looked at me with wet eyes and said, "When the yellow bell rings, Dad has to stop talking." That changed everything. "Where is your dad?" I asked. "Home." "What home?" He leaned closer. "By the yard, behind the house, blue door." Then he sat back and in a completely normal voice said, "Can we go see the wolves now?" That broke me more than the whisper, the switch, the speed, the fact that he already knew how to hide what he knew. Children are not born knowing how to do that. Adults teach them. We went to the wolves because what else was I supposed to do right there? Scream next to a stroller, call the police near the cotton candy stand, interrogate a frightened child in public. So I kept moving while my insides came apart. At the wolves, he stood with both hands on the rail watching one gray female pacing the edge of the enclosure. I said, "Buddy, has your dad talked to you?" He nodded. "How?" "Sometimes through the blue door." "Does your mom know?" "She says not to call him Dad when Marcus is there." That sentence did not even feel real. I asked who Marcus was, just to see what he would say. He looked confused that I asked. "The doctor man." Of course. The drive back to Claire's house felt longer than it should have. Eli barely talked. When we turned onto the street, I slowed down and really looked for the first time in years. White fence, trimmed hedges, main house, and past the side path behind the house, visible if you cared enough to turn your head, a detached guest house with a blue door. My stomach turned. I parked. Eli did not move. "Do you want me to walk you in?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. That told me plenty. Kids who feel safe at home do not usually need a grandparent escort to the front door in broad daylight. Claire opened before we knocked. She had changed clothes, soft sweater, hair clipped back, face controlled. How was the zoo? She asked. Good, Eli said too quickly. I handed her the little wolf souvenir he picked out. She smiled at him, then at me. Thank you for taking him. It gave me a chance to catch up on paperwork. Paperwork. I looked past her shoulder. Then, from somewhere behind the house, I heard a bell. 2 light, metallic rings. Eli's hand slipped out of mine instantly. Not gradually. Instantly. He looked toward the backyard, and all the color left his face. Claire noticed, put her hand on his shoulder, said quietly, "Homework first." He nodded and went inside. I watched him go. Then I stepped off the porch to get a clearer look. "Thomas?" she said. Not angry, just a little shift in tone. Like I had stepped out of the role she wanted me in. There it was. A small yellow bell hanging on a hook near the guest house. Not decorative, not random, functional. The blue door was shut, curtains closed, no movement, but the whole thing felt wrong. I turned back to Claire. "What's the bell for?" She did not blink. "Oh, that old thing? Eli likes to ring it when he's playing outside. Not a good enough lie. Not for that moment. And the guest house? Storage mostly. Storage, yes. For what?" Her face changed just a little, a tiny hardening. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. "Thomas, is something wrong?" I looked right at her and asked the question I should have been asking for years. "Can I see Owen?" She exhaled slowly like I was being difficult. "You know that's not how this works." "No," I said. "I know that's what I've been told." For 1 second, something hard flashed across her face. Then it was gone. "He had a difficult week," she said. Marcus adjusted his routine. This is not a good time to make him agitated. Routine. Adjusted. Agitated. Always the same kind of words. Then she did what she always did when cornered. "Oh, and before I forget, Marcus says December may be too late this year. He wants to increase observation before winter. If there's any way to send support sooner, it would really help. 5 years earlier, that sentence would have worked." That day all I heard was timing, bell, blue door, frightened child, money. I looked at the bell again, then at the guest house, then at her, and I said the first honest thing I had said in years. "I'll think about it." She did not like that answer. People who live off certainty hate uncertain verbs. I drove home with both hands locked on the wheel, passed my own street by 3 blocks before I noticed, turned around, drove slower. The whole neighborhood looked slightly wrong. Like reality had shifted a few inches while I was not paying attention. At home, the silence felt different too, not peaceful, judgmental. I stood in the kitchen for 10 minutes without taking my jacket off. Then I went into the living room and looked at the photos on the mantel. Evelyn laughing in a lawn chair. Owen at 17 holding up a fish he was too proud of. Eli in overalls with birthday frosting on his face. A lake trip from before, everything split into before and after. I kept staring at Owen's photo, trying to match the boy I raised with the hidden man behind the blue door. Then I sat down and opened every folder I had. Invoices, transfers, texts, holiday cards, medical notes. Marcus had prepared for family reassurance. I read them like a mechanic this time, not like a father. That matters. A father reads for comfort. A mechanic reads for inconsistency. The language repeated. The structure repeated. The same phrases kept showing up: emotional regulation, low stimulation, structured compliance, temporary contact restrictions, increased support needs, and the dates. Once I looked closely, I hated the dates. Every request came before a holiday or before December. Every push for extra money came right after some mention of Eli. Like access to the child and access to the wallet were tied together by design. By 6 that evening, I had spread 5 years of my own gullibility across the kitchen table. By 7, I called Ruth. By 8, I knew one thing for sure. I was done waiting for permission to know where my own son was. Ruth Alvarez showed up at my house the next morning at 9:12 carrying a leather tote, a yellow legal pad, and the exact same expression she wore at Evelyn's funeral when she leaned toward me and whispered, "That pastor has never suffered a day in his life." Ruth has a gift for seeing through performance. She spent years working probate, guardianship, emergency family petitions, estate fights, and enough ugly paperwork to know something most people never learn. The worst things in life do not usually hide in dramatic places. They hide in stapled packets, billing summaries, half-signed forms, language nobody reads closely because grief is already doing enough damage. She stepped into my kitchen, looked at the table, and gave a low whistle. "Well," she said, taking off her coat, "either you finally started paying attention or the devil got sloppy." "Coffee?" I asked. "If it's fresh." "It isn't." "Then yes." That was our friendship. She sat down, put on her glasses, and started sorting everything with the kind of speed that made me feel sick. Invoices in one pile, transfer confirmations in another, texts and emails in a third. Marcus's summaries separate, Claire's notes and holiday updates off to the side. For 15 minutes, the only sounds in my kitchen were paper sliding on wood and Ruth making little annoyed noises every time she found something she did not like. Then she tapped one invoice. This letterhead changed. I frowned. "What?" "Look." She held up 2 invoices, one from the 2nd year, one from the 4th. Same clinic name, same categories, same general layout, but the logo spacing was different. Small thing, the kind of thing that means nothing until it means something. Then she pointed to the signature block. Marcus Vale, MD, Director, Structured Recovery Services. Then the other. Marcus Vale, MD, Clinical Director, Structured Recovery Services. "You see it?" she asked. Different title. "Yes, but if this were a real billing template evolving normally, I'd expect other changes too. Instead, the body text is basically identical. Same paragraphing, same spacing. Somebody updated the title and forgot to update the rest." I stared at the papers. "So what does that mean?" It means somebody is making these documents by hand, Thomas. That landed slowly. Too slowly. Because once it landed, everything else changed shape. Ruth moved on to the texts. She did not read them emotionally. She read them like evidence. Every date mattered, every ask mattered, every excuse mattered. She started a timeline: first intake payment, holiday support transfer, early request before Christmas, medication adjustment, insurance gap, extended observation, family stress response, child-related issue, additional support. The categories kept repeating. Different months, same structure, same rhythm. Then she looked up and asked, "Do you notice what is missing?" What? Specifics. She was right immediately. I asked questions. Claire always answered the emotional shape of the question, never the actual question. How is Owen sleeping? He has hard nights. Can I visit? Now is not a good time. What exactly did Marcus say? That consistency matters. Is he improving? Recovery isn't linear. Nothing solid. Nothing you could later hold up and disprove. Ruth leaned back. "You've been paying for a fog machine," she said. Then she asked something I had not expected. "Did you ever sign anything?" "No. No treatment consent, no support authorization, no guardianship paperwork. Nothing. Claire handled everything." She nodded slowly, like that answer was either very good or very bad. At 11:30, she started making calls. One to a former county records coworker, one to somebody in civil filings, one to a person she only referred to as the useful one. I paced, couldn't help it. I have rebuilt transmissions with less nervous energy than I had that morning. Then just after 1, she found the first real crack. A discharge notice. Not sent to me, obviously, but traced through filing references and provider records that should have been checked years ago if I had known the right questions to ask. Owen Reed had been officially discharged from inpatient treatment 4 years and 7 months earlier. I read that line 3 times. 4 years and 7 months. Disposition, transition to supervised private recovery environment under licensed oversight. Not clinic, not facility, environment. And the address listed for the care environment was Claire's home address. I sat down so hard the chair scraped across the floor. "That's their house," I said. "I know. He was discharged to their house. That is what it says. No one told me. I know." The kitchen got very quiet. I looked at the page again. My hand was shaking. Can they do that? Some people can do almost anything when everyone around them assumes the paperwork is real. That was the first time I laughed that day. It sounded ugly. Ruth kept going. By the afternoon, she had found another problem. The oversight forms tied to Owen's discharge referenced monthly review logs. Those logs should have passed through an actual care coordination channel. Instead, they traced back to internal documentation controlled entirely through Marcus's office. No second provider, no independent case manager, no outside audit, no real external checks. One doctor, one spouse, one story, one money stream. That is not treatment. That is enclosure. Ruth said the word before I did. "Thomas, I'm not saying criminal yet, but I'm saying controlled." Controlled. That word opened something ugly inside me, because controlled can become compliance, and compliance can become confinement. I thought about the blue door, the bell, Eli slipping his hand out of mine, Claire always answering too fast. Ruth saw it on my face and said, "Do not do anything stupid before dark. We do this right." That is exactly the kind of sentence people use when they think you might do something stupid. So of course, I pretended I would not. By 6:30 that evening, I was parked 2 houses down from Claire's place with my headlights off, a paper cup of terrible coffee in the holder, and enough fear in my chest to make my hands go numb. Ruth sat beside me with binoculars she claimed were left over from watching a former husband become predictable. The neighborhood looked ordinary. That made it worse. Lawns, porch lights, a teenager walking a dog, somebody grilling, a television flickering through one window. The world had no idea what sat on that block. We watched. At 7:12, Eli's bedroom light came on. At 7:21, Claire crossed the kitchen carrying a tray. At 7:26, the yellow bell rang once. One clear metallic note. Not random, not playful, deliberate. 30 seconds later, a shadow moved behind the guest house curtain. Ruth lowered the binoculars first. "Well," she said quietly, "storage just moved." At 8:10, the side kitchen light came on. At 8:18, Claire walked outside with the tray and disappeared into the guest house. She stayed 7 minutes. Then came back out, carrying the tray with an empty bowl and what looked like pill cups on it. I stared so hard my eyes hurt. "She took him food," I said. "Yes, she took him medicine, probably. That's my son in there." "I know." Then she said the one thing that kept me from getting out of the truck and tearing the door off. "And if you move too early, you give them time to build another story." That was the problem with people like Claire and Marcus. They always had the story first. By the time you realized you were inside it, they were already ready for your reaction. So we kept watching. At 8:43, the curtain shifted again. At 8:45, through the cracked window, I heard something. 3 short notes. A whistle. Low, thin, but unmistakable. Ruth turned. "What was that?" "Owen, you sure? He used to whistle that at the shop." That was the first genuinely good thing I had heard in 2 days. Not because it meant he was okay, because it meant he was still in there enough to remember himself. We stayed another hour. No staff, no transport, no clinic routine, no professionals, just Claire moving back and forth between the house and the guest house like she was maintaining a private system. At 10, Ruth made me go home. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the tray in her hands and the shadow behind the curtain. The next morning, she was already working before I finished my coffee. She had more records. Marcus's practice worked through a small behavioral group on paper, but the billing addresses had shifted more than once. Some support entries ran through vague entities with names like Structured Wellness Consultation and Residential Behavioral Continuity. It all sounded legitimate if you squinted. If you did not squint, it sounded like soft language built to hide ugly conduct. Then came the money. She could not see full bank records, but she could trace public filings, linked entities, mailing contacts, business registrations, property timing, and the account references on the invoices. By noon, she had a legal pad full of names and arrows. Marcus Vale, Claire Reed, Vale Family Wellness Partners LLC, a holding company, a secondary mail service, an address tied to a condo outside Allentown. What does that mean? I asked. It means either these are the most suspicious, honest people I've ever seen, she said, or your money isn't going where you think it is. I already knew which one my gut believed. But gut is not proof, and without proof, people like Claire stay in charge of the story. That afternoon, I did what I should have done years earlier. I walked into Marcus Vale's office, not angry, not accusing, smiling. His receptionist gave me that polished medical office kindness people use when their whole job is making bad news feel procedural. I'd like to drop off some financial paperwork for my son's care, I said. Name? Owen Reed. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, then stopped, just for a second. Enough. Dr. Vale is with patients today, she said. That's fine. I only need confirmation his file is active. The smile stayed. Her eyes did not. I'm not able to discuss patient records. I'm not asking for records. Silence. Then, if you'd like to leave an envelope, I can make sure it's routed appropriately. Appropriately. Another one of those soft words doing too much work. I handed her a blank envelope with Owen's name on it. As she reached for it, I asked casually, still in the same program? She hesitated. Then she said, Dr. Vale remains involved in his care. Remains involved. Not remains admitted. Not remains under treatment. Just involved. Too careful. Way too careful. I thanked her and left. Sitting in the parking lot, I realized something simple. Honest people speak plainly. People managing a story do not. By 3 that afternoon, Ruth found the first property clue that made the whole thing feel even worse. The guest house had been renovated 4 years earlier under permit. Electrical update, window replacement, insulation, interior partition wall, sound dampening materials. I read that last part twice. What kind of guest house needs sound dampening? She did not answer. She did not need to. At 5, she came back with one more piece. A draft family stability petition. Never fully filed, but prepared. Language about temporary contact limits between father and child pending mental fitness review. They had been getting ready to legalize the arrangement. Not for Owen's benefit, to protect it. That was when I stopped feeling mostly angry and started feeling sick, because this was not just greed. It was design, patience, structure. That night I went back, alone this time. Ruth told me not to. I told her I was just driving past. We both knew that was a lie. I parked farther away and came through the shadow line behind the neighboring fence. The guest house window was cracked less than an inch. Light spilled through. I heard Claire first, soft, measured, fake calm. You need to finish everything tonight if you want your Friday privilege. Then Owen. I'm trying. You do not try, Owen. You comply. Something in me went cold. Then Claire said, and if you keep the tone Marcus asked for, Eli can leave you another drawing this weekend. A pause. Then Owen, with this awful little note of hope in his voice, said, Really? Yes, if you keep the tone. That nearly made me move right then. I had to grip the fence hard enough to hurt myself just to stay still. They were using his son as a reward. Not metaphorically, literally. Then the bell rang once. Silence. Perfect silence. Nobody in real treatment goes silent because a bell rings. Only someone trained does that. I backed away before Claire came out. The walk back to my truck felt longer than the drive home. Everything sounded wrong. A dog barking, a screen door, TV through a window. The world kept doing normal things while my understanding of the last 5 years collapsed. Back home, I told Ruth everything. She listened, then said, We're past suspicion now. Yes, we need inside access. Yes, we do it carefully. No, I said, we do it fast. She was quiet a second, then said exactly what I needed to hear and hated hearing. Fast gets him moved. She was right. If Claire or Marcus sensed pressure, they could change everything. Move him, push more meds, rewrite the story. Say he was dangerous. Say I was unstable. Say Eli imagined it. Once people like that know you are watching, they stop lying passively and start lying professionally. So we needed real proof, not just a bell, not just a whisper, not just my own fury. The next day, Ruth came to the shop after lunch carrying sandwiches and a plan. I know someone, she said. That usually means trouble. It usually means results. His name was Frank D'Amico, retired locksmith. Bad knees, good morals. Owed Ruth a favor involving an estate fight, a shed, and some cousins she described only as unbelievably stupid. He met us at the shop after closing, listened carefully, then said, If this is what you think it is, you should call the police. We will, Ruth said, after we know enough to survive the first lie. Frank nodded, then said, Detached guest house locks are usually garbage. That is how the next step started. Not with justice. With a retired locksmith insulting hardware. We chose Thursday. Claire took Eli to soccer on Thursdays. Marcus usually came later. At 4:20, Ruth called and said, Now. By 4:30, we were behind the tree line near Claire's place. The main house was empty, yard clear, no curtain movement, no bell. Frank crossed the yard, crouched at the blue door, looked at the lock, and muttered, Cheap. 30 seconds later, he had it open. I froze for one breath too long. Ruth looked at me and said, Move. So I moved. The first thing that hit me inside was the smell. Stale air, medicine, overwashed fabric, that faint, sweet metallic smell some people get after too many pills and too little sunlight. The second thing that hit me was how normal someone had tried to make it feel. Bed, lamp, desk, books, rug, cheap framed print on the wall, like somebody had asked, how do we make captivity feel tasteful? Then I saw the real room. Window latches on the outside, digital lock on the partition, medication sorted by time, 3 binders labeled behavior review, shelf full of journals, drawer full of pencils with the erasers removed. That last one bothered me more than I expected, maybe because it meant mistakes were allowed, but correction was not yours to control. Above the bed were Eli's drawings, dozens of them, cars, animals, little houses, stick figures, one with 3 people holding hands under a giant sun. Some had notes on the back in Owen's handwriting. I miss you. Proud of you. Be brave for me. Grandpa loves you. That almost took my legs out, because it meant 2 things at once. He was alive enough to write, and trapped enough that paper under a door had become fatherhood. Frank stayed on lookout. Ruth opened the binders. Inside were logs. Patient required tone correction. Exposure to child content contingent on stability. Verbal agitation reduced after bell cue. Excessive emotional fixation on father discouraged. Patient responds to structured guilt reminders. Structured guilt reminders. They wrote it down. Actually wrote it down. Then I opened one of the journals. At first I thought it would read like therapy. It didn't. It read like survival under supervision. Morning state. Required reflections. Memory correction. Gratitude. Contact eligibility. Memory correction. One page said, I still hear the steel when I close my eyes. Marcus says guilt means I still understand what I did. Claire says Eli is safer while I stay quiet. If I can hold my tone all week, maybe I can hear him in the yard Sunday. That was not recovery. That was negotiation. Another page said, I asked again if Dad knows where I am. Claire said knowing would only hurt him more. Marcus says love sometimes looks like distance. I am trying to accept that. Then we heard a sound behind the partition wall, a footstep, then silence. My heart slammed hard enough to hurt. I looked at the closed inner door, and from behind it, in a voice worn thin by fear and routine, my son said, Claire? For 1 second, I could not move. It was not just Owen's voice. It was everything under it. Hope, fear, obedience, all packed so tightly together I could barely tell one from the other. Claire? He said again. My throat closed. I took 1 step toward the inner door and stopped because my legs suddenly felt unreliable, like age had chosen that exact second to announce itself properly. Ruth spoke first. Owen, she said, calm and clear. It's not Claire. Silence. Then a chair scraped inside the room. Who is it? He asked. That told me more than almost anything else. A free man asks what? A controlled man asks who? It's your father, I said. No answer, just breathing. Then, carefully like he was speaking around something sharp, he said, no. I stepped closer. Owen, it's me. No. That second no was not denial. It was panic. I looked at Ruth. She looked at me. Frank turned from the window. Owen, I said, I'm opening the door. His answer came instantly. Please don't. I froze. There are 1,000 ways to imagine seeing your child after years of separation. You imagine tears, shock, anger, maybe a collapse into your arms. You do not imagine your own son begging you not to open a door because your presence feels dangerous to him. That is when I understood this was worse than confinement. Confinement breaks with locks. This had gone into his reflexes, his body, his idea of safety. I put my hand on the knob. Owen, I said quietly, I'm here because Eli told me the truth. Silence, then one shallow inhale, then another. Eli talked to you? Yes. The room behind the door went still in a new way. Not fear exactly, not relief either. Something fragile, like reality had shifted and he was afraid to lean on it. Are you alone? He asked. No, Ruth's with me. Another pause. Then, so quietly I almost missed it. Did Marcus send you? That question broke something inside me. No, I said, and my voice cracked. No, son, he did not send me. I came because I should have come a long time ago. I turned the knob and opened the door. The room was smaller than I expected. Narrow bed, small sink, 1 chair, 1 shelf, no usable window, a vent too small to matter, a lamp placed high enough that he could not control it easily. And Owen. He sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the blanket so hard his knuckles had gone white. If I live to be 110, I will still remember that first look at him. He was thinner than any version of my son I had ever known. Not starving, not skeletal, but reduced, sanded down. His hair was longer and uneven at the ends, not by neglect, by bad maintenance from someone who did not care. His beard was trimmed, but not like a man living normally, like somebody kept him presentable for a reason. His clothes were clean in a way that felt wrong. Gray sweatpants, navy long-sleeve shirt, soft socks. Nothing about him looked accidental. Everything looked managed, curated captivity. He stared at me like I was either the answer to a prayer or the start of another punishment. Dad, he said, just that one word. I took a step. He flinched so hard it looked like somebody hit him. I stopped immediately. Okay, I said. Okay, I'm stopping. His chest was moving too fast. He looked at Ruth, at Frank, back at me, then at the open doorway, always scanning, always checking what came next. How did you get in? He asked. Frank opened the lock, Ruth said. Owen frowned. Why would you do that? That question hit me strangely, because the answer felt obvious to me. Because you are my son. Because you are in a locked room. Because something is wrong. But obvious answers are not always the ones captivity leaves in a person's head. I said the simplest thing I had. Because I came to take a look. For half a second he almost smiled. That sounds like you, he said. And right there for one tiny heartbeat I saw my son. The old version. the one who said dry sideways things when emotion got too close. Then he looked at the open door again and the softness vanished. You should close it, he said. If she sees it open, there'll be a problem. She? Ruth asked gently. Claire. He said her name the way people say weather. Not with love, not even with hatred, just as a condition you have to manage. I crouched a little so I wouldn't be standing over him. Owen, I said, why are you in here? His face changed, guarded instantly. There were clearly questions he could survive, and questions he had learned not to touch. That one touched too much. I'm in recovery, he said. Not I'm trapped, not I'm being treated, not I need help. I'm in recovery. Script language. Recovery from what? I asked. You know what from. I want to hear you say it. Wrong move. I knew it the second his shoulders tightened. Owen, Ruth said softly, nobody here is trying to trap you, we're trying to understand. He looked at her for a long second. Then he said, flat as death, I think I killed someone. No one moved. There it was, the engine under everything, or at least the engine they had given him. My first feeling was not disbelief, it was nausea, because suddenly the whole arrangement made horrible sense. You can keep a man in a locked room for years if you convince him the world outside is where punishment waits. Who? I asked. Natalie. The name took a second. Then I remembered. Claire's old friend. Dark hair, loud laugh, at the wedding years ago. When? Ruth asked. 5 years ago, around the time of the site accident, after it. My scalp went cold. What happened? He looked like a man deciding whether he could survive his next sentence. Finally, he said, she came over. Claire wasn't home yet. We argued. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't thinking straight. She said something about how none of it was really my fault, and I snapped. I shoved her. She fell, hit the side of the table. There was blood. She stopped moving. The room shrank. I could hear the clock in the outer room, Frank shifting his weight, my own breathing. Did you call 911? Ruth asked. He laughed once. Dead sound. No. Why not? Because Claire came home first. Then he looked at me. Really looked at me. And what I saw there hurt worse than almost anything else in that room. He was ashamed of me seeing him. Not ashamed later. Ashamed right then. Like being seen at all was humiliating. She called Marcus, he said. Marcus was involved from the start. He nodded. Claire said he knew what to do. My fists had closed without me noticing. What did he do? He came. He checked Natalie. Said she was gone. He said if the police came right then with the job site under review and my state the way it was, they'd bury me. He said panic looks like guilt. He said intent wouldn't matter. He said men like me get made examples of. Men like me. Another phrase planted in him. I forced myself to stay calm. Then what? Then Claire said Eli would be taken from us if this got out. Marcus said if I cooperated, there might be a way to contain the damage. They said I was lucky they came home when they did. Lucky. That word made me want to be sick. They took care of Natalie? Ruth asked. He nodded. I never saw her again. That mattered. I did not know how yet, but it mattered. And after that, they moved fast. Too fast for me to think. Claire packed a bag. Marcus drove me to the clinic that night. He said I needed to disappear while they managed the legal exposure. He said the construction accident gave context. He said my mental state would make everything worse if I was visible. He said if I stayed cooperative, maybe there would be a path back later. Path back later, Ruth repeated. He nodded. For the first few months, I believed it. They kept saying paperwork was still active. Risk was still active. Timing wasn't safe. Marcus said public sympathy after the site accident had turned. Said if Natalie's disappearance got tied to me, I'd get destroyed. His voice started shaking then. So I stayed calm. I did what they said, took what they gave me, wrote what they told me to write, signed what they told me to sign. Every time I asked about Eli, Claire said she was protecting him. Every time I asked about you, Marcus said your age and blood pressure made stress dangerous. Every time I said I should turn myself in, they said confessions only help guilty people feel better, not the families they ruin. Then he looked down at his hands. You believed all of it. I said. He nodded, then added the part that scared me most. I still do, part of it. That honesty hit like a punch, because it meant the lie was not dead. It was still active inside him, still fighting to survive. Ruth took one step closer. Owen, have you ever seen a body? No. Death certificate? No. Police report? No. Anything with your own eyes that proved Natalie died from that shove? He stared at her. Then his face changed. Not hope, not understanding, confusion. Real confusion. The kind that comes when somebody finally asks the question nobody asked years earlier. I saw blood, he said. That's not the same thing. I heard Marcus tell Claire she was gone. You heard him say it, Ruth said. You did not verify it. She wasn't moving. Were you in a stable enough state to judge that? No answer. Did they call emergency services? No. Did they ever explain that in a way that wasn't about your fear? Silence. He looked like the floor might open under him. I stood up and moved to the sink, not because I needed water, because I needed to shift the room. I turned the faucet on. Thin stream, cold. Owen, I said, if they lied about where you were, they could lie about what happened that night. He did not answer, but his eyes came up. That was enough. Doubt had entered, and sometimes doubt is the first real breath a trapped person takes. I looked around the room again. The journals, the cards, the schedules, the bell, the child drawings, the medications. Everything depended on one central pillar, that he believed he deserved the room. Break that, and maybe the whole thing starts collapsing. Owen, I asked, why didn't you ever leave? He gave me a look I will never forget. Not angry, not defensive, just tired. Because leaving only matters if there's somewhere clean to go. I stared at him. If I left and they were right, Eli would lose everything. You'd get dragged into it. Claire said they had already spent years managing the damage around me. Marcus said one wrong move and it all comes down on everyone. He rubbed his wrists. After a while, the room felt simpler than finding out. That was the prison. Not the lock, not the walls. The fear that the truth outside might be worse than the cage. We sat there in silence. Then we heard a car door slam in the driveway. Owen went rigid instantly. All the softness disappeared. She's back early, he whispered. Ruth turned to Frank. How long? Maybe 30 seconds. Owen, I said, we're leaving with you. No, son, no. He stood and backed toward the wall. If she sees me leave like this with you here, she'll know it broke. She'll call Marcus before you hit the street. He was right. I hated that he was right. Ruth moved fast. We do not need a heroic decision. We need a useful one. Can you act normal for 5 minutes? He swallowed. What does normal mean? That question broke something in me all over again. Normal means whatever she expects, Ruth said. The back door of the main house opened. Footsteps on the path. Owen's face emptied, a performance settling over him. Get out through the window, he whispered. Now. I stepped toward him. When can I come back? He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time there was something stronger than fear in his face. Need for certainty. If you come back, he said, bring proof. That was the last thing I saw before I climbed out the window, back in the yard, along the fence, into the shadows, like a thief escaping his own son's captivity. We made it to the truck seconds before Claire entered the guest house with a grocery bag. She looked ordinary. That was the sick part. Routine evil is harder to bear than dramatic evil. It means the person still remembers to buy milk. Ruth shut the truck door and let out one long breath. Well, she said, voice thin now. Now we know what we're dealing with. I gripped the steering wheel. No. She looked at me. Now we know enough to hate it. That's different. I drove without really seeing the road. At the first red light, I realized my hands were shaking. At the second, I realized I was crying. Not loudly. Just tears falling while I stared through the windshield and tried to understand how 5 years could disappear inside such a neat little room. Back home, Ruth spread the 2 pages she had taken on the kitchen table. One listed approved reinforcement tools. Child voice contact drawing, exchange bell, cue, compliance, restricted food, reward, father memory, redirection. The other was worse. It was a note in Marcus's handwriting. Patient remains highly responsive to guilt framing and child-linked incentive. Maintain narrative that outside exposure equals collapse. If father becomes intrusive, increase language around burden and risk. Burden and risk. They had a playbook, not treatment notes. A playbook. Ruth stared at it for a long moment, then said quietly, Thomas, your son is not in recovery. He is in a managed dependency system. I sat down across from her. He thinks he killed someone, yes. And you think that's a lie too? I think it is at least convenient enough to distrust. What if it isn't? Then we find out cleanly. But right now, every single fact in this story comes through people who profit from him staying in that room. That was true. Brutally true. The first stable truth in the room, profit. Follow that, and maybe the rest opens. I stood by the sink and looked out at the dark street. If Natalie is dead, there has to be a record. Yes. If she's alive, there has to be a record. Yes. If there's no record, then someone worked very hard to disappear the wrong woman. I turned back toward her. What do we do next? She folded her glasses and said, we find Natalie Hughes. We started with the internet, not because I suddenly turned into some great investigator. Not because I trusted screens more than people. Because when a lie lasts this long, it usually leaves traces somewhere small. A registration, a photo, a mailing address, a business filing, a record nobody expected anyone to connect. Ruth sat at my kitchen table the next morning with her laptop open, glasses low on her nose, coffee going cold beside her. I stood by the counter pretending not to pace. That is one of those little lies men tell with their feet. Natalie Hughes, Ruth said, typing slowly. Dark hair, Claire's old friend, at the wedding years ago. That all you've got? That and a bad trifle one Christmas. Ruth looked up. That might honestly help more than your memory usually does. I stared at her. She looked back down at the screen. Church events, charity breakfasts, local business mixers. Women who make bad trifle tend to be photographed beside folding tables. That was Ruth. Sometimes I genuinely could not tell if she was joking until 10 minutes later when the joke turned into evidence. She started broad, too broad, honestly. Dozens of Natalie Hugheses, wrong age, wrong face, wrong state, wrong whole life. One from Ohio bred rabbits, one in Arizona sold real estate, one in Maryland looked like she could have been our Natalie in bad lighting, but she had 3 teenage daughters and a husband with a fishing boat in every photo. Wrong woman. An hour passed, then another. I was already beginning to hate hope again when Ruth suddenly stopped typing. Not dramatically, just still. That was how I knew something had landed. What? I asked. She did not answer right away. She turned the screen toward me. It was a group photo from some awful little local business breakfast. Bad carpet, cheap hotel room, one pull-up banner in the back with words like community, growth, and leadership on it. 10 people standing in a line holding paper coffee cups and smiling like no one in the room had ever done anything darker than overcharge for bookkeeping. And there, third from the left, stood Natalie Hughes. Alive, dark hair, shorter than I remembered, cream blazer, coffee cup in one hand, name tag half visible on her jacket. Alive. I sat down without planning to. You sure? Ruth kept looking at the screen. Unless you know another Natalie Hughes with the same face and a sudden passion for leadership breakfasts, yes. I stared at the picture for a long time. Alive. That should have brought relief first. It did not. It brought rage, then humiliation, then something even uglier than both. Because if Natalie was alive, then my son had spent 5 years in that room under a lie built around guilt. And I had not just failed to see it, I had financed it. Ruth printed the photo. Then she found another, and another. Natalie outside a coffee shop 3 towns over. Natalie listed in a networking event program. Natalie attached to a dissolved LLC filing. That last one made both of us go quiet. What is it? I asked. Ruth tapped the page. Hughes Consulting Support Services. Dissolved 2 years ago. Initial mailing contact through Vail Wellness Administrative Suite. There it was. Not full proof, not enough for court, but plenty enough to poison the morning. They were connected, I said. Looks that way. How long? Long enough to be careful, not smart enough to be invisible. Ruth kept digging. Then she found something worse. Marcus had appeared in a family court matter years earlier. Not ours, somebody else's. Different county. He had submitted guidance around a parent-child contact structure. At first glance, it looked like normal clinical language. Stability, controlled exposure, boundary maintenance, emotional regulation. But the more Ruth read it out loud, the more I heard something familiar. Something I already hated. Child-linked incentive, regulated contact, progress-dependent access, protective delay. Not the same case, same language. He's done some version of this before, Ruth said. My stomach dropped. What do you mean some version? I mean maybe not this exact monstrosity, but he already knows how to use professional language to justify keeping family at a distance while calling it protection. That mattered, because it meant Marcus was not improvising. He had vocabulary for it, structure for it. Maybe even confidence built from smaller earlier versions, nobody ever fully challenged. And if that was true, Claire had not just stumbled into something bad. She had partnered with someone fluent in it. I went to the shop that afternoon and got absolutely nothing useful done. Not one thing. Danny handled most of the work without saying much because mechanics know when a man has had a call, a diagnosis, or some other form of invisible impact. Good ones know how to give you room without making a show of it. Around 5, Ruth called. I found the condo. That got my full attention. What condo? The one your money probably helped buy. She gave me the address, 42 minutes away. Small condo development outside Allentown. Property registered through an LLC tied to Marcus and Claire. Purchased 3 years earlier. 3 years. That meant while Owen sat in the guest house believing he was too dangerous to live his own life, they had been buying themselves another one. I drove there immediately. Ruth met me in the parking lot because, as she put it, if I let you do this alone, I will spend the whole evening imagining you in a holding cell trying to explain moral outrage to a county judge. The place looked harmless. That made it feel worse. Beige siding, trimmed bushes, tiny little balcony. Mailboxes with decorative numbers. The kind of place people buy when they want to look stable on purpose. Unit 14B, second floor, curtains partly open. We sat in my truck until dark. At 6:48, a silver sedan pulled in. Natalie got out. Even from that distance, I knew it was her. She had grocery bags in one hand and her phone in the other, laughing at something on the screen, walking like a woman living a normal life. Not a dead woman, not a secret, not a ghost. She climbed the stairs and unlocked 14B without hesitation. Not visiting, going home. Ruth said nothing for almost a minute. Then finally, well, just that. Because sometimes one ordinary word carries enough disgust all by itself. We kept watching. At 7:56, Marcus arrived, parked, got out, walked straight to the same unit. No hesitation, no looking around, no concern. Natalie opened the door before he even knocked. He stepped inside like that was where he belonged. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my palms hurt. For a second, I closed my eyes and saw Owen's room. The narrow bed, the cards, the drawings from Eli, the journals. Then I looked back at the lit balcony, warm windows, open space, clean air. And all I could think was, he has no window that opens. I wanted both of them destroyed in that moment. Not arrested later, not processed carefully. Destroyed. That kind of thought is dangerous. I know it. I knew it right then. But truth does not erase rage. It just gives it cleaner reason. We drove back in silence. At my house, Ruth spread everything across the kitchen table. Natalie's photos, the condo records, the LLC references, Marcus entering the unit, times, dates, connections. Then she asked the question I had been trying not to ask. How much of this do we take to Owen now? All of it. No. I looked at her. No. Not all at once. Why? Because if he's lived inside one version of reality for 5 years, you don't smash it in one blow unless you want him to cling even harder to the lie. I hated how right she sounded. You give him enough to create doubt, she said, enough to loosen the main story. Too much too fast, and he may break toward what hurts less, not toward what's true. I sat down heavily. So what first? She held up the first photo. Natalie alive, holding coffee, smiling under fluorescent lights. This. Why this? Because it attacks the foundation. If Natalie is alive, then the guilt story changes. And if the guilt story changes, everything built on top of it starts to wobble. That is a strange kind of mercy. Strategy rarely feels kind in the moment. It just happens to be the only thing standing between grief and disaster. The next afternoon, I went back to the guest house. Not with police, not with force, just me. I waited down the street until Claire left with Eli. Then I came through the side again, past the fence line, under the same strip of shadow that had started feeling too familiar. The yellow bell was still there. Small, ugly, Ridiculous. I hated it more every time I saw it. I knocked twice. Owen opened almost immediately. That alone was a change. A few days earlier, he moved like every second belonged to someone else. Now he looked like he had been waiting. He had washed his face, combed his hair, changed into a dark green shirt, not healthier exactly, just more assembled. He looked at the envelope in my hand. You brought something. Yes, what is it? Proof. He let me in. This time he sat in the chair. I took the edge of the bed. Somehow that felt better. Less like I was looming. For a few seconds we just looked at each other. Then I slid the first photo across the desk. Natalie, alive, coffee cup in hand. He looked at it, then kept looking. That's not current, he said. It is. He shook his head. No. I slid the event program after it. Date visible, location visible. His hand moved toward the paper but stopped. She looks alive. He flinched at the word. Then he stared at the coffee cup. She hated coffee, he said quietly. What? Natalie hated coffee. It made her stomach turn. She always drank tea, peppermint if she was nervous, black tea if she was trying to look older than she was. He narrowed his eyes at the photo. That cup is wrong. There it was, a crack from his side, memory pushing back against the script. Small details matter, taste, habits, the little truths people forget to fake. I pulled out the next photo, then the condo record, then the LLC note linking Marcus and Natalie. He looked from one to the next without touching them. Then he said, no, not panic, not a breakdown, just refusal. No what? I asked. No, because if this is real, then none of it. He stopped. None of what? He looked at me then with something in his face I had not seen in years. Not fear, not anger, something younger, a child's need for an adult to tell him what reality is. If this is real, he whispered, then what have I been doing in here? There is no clean answer to that question. So I told him the truest short answer I had, surviving a lie. His eyes filled instantly. He turned away, not crying loudly, not dramatic, just breaking quietly. I stayed where I was. Some pain gets worse if you rush toward it. After a long silence, he asked, did Claire know? Yes. How long? All of it, as far as I can tell. He nodded. Slowly. Then again. And Marcus? Yes. He laughed once. Terrible sound. Of course, Marcus. Then he covered his face with both hands and sat there so long I thought maybe I had lost him into some private place I could not reach. Finally, he lowered his hands and said, I need to tell you the rest. So he did. Not neatly, not chronologically. That is not how memory works when shame is carrying half of it. It came in fragments. Natalie showed up that night angry but not scared. That mattered. The argument started over money, yes, but also over Claire. Apparently, Natalie accused Owen of being too blind to see what was going on right in front of him. At the time, he thought she meant the construction accident and his breakdown. Now, looking at the papers on the desk, he was not so sure. She kept pushing, he said, not just arguing, pushing, smiling in this weird way, like she wanted something from me. I remember shoving her. I remember her falling. I remember blood, a lot of blood. I remember panic. I remember Marcus saying she was gone. He pressed his hands together. But I can't remember the middle clearly anymore. The middle feels wrong now, too sharp in some places, missing in others. That mattered. Trauma blurs memory. Coached guilt blurs it in its own way. I asked, did you ever ask why there was no police report? I asked once. What did they say? He gave me a dead little smile. That Marcus handled it. Handled it. Magic words for frightened people. What about paperwork? I asked. I signed things at the clinic the first week. Consent, treatment planning, confidentiality. I was heavily medicated. He frowned. I don't even know anymore which things were treatment and which things were control. I believed him. That was part of the trap too, not just the room. Confusion about what belonged to reality and what had been installed afterward. Then he said something that changed the air again. There was one time I told Claire I wanted to see Eli no matter what Marcus thought. Really see him. Not drawings, not through the door. Actually see him. What happened? She brought him to the window. My blood went cold. He was outside near the fence playing with a truck. She opened the curtain and let me look for maybe 10 seconds. Owen's voice flattened. Then she said, this is what you destroy when you get selfish. I had to stand up. I could not stay sitting after that. My body would not allow it. I went to the sink, turned the water on, turned it off, braced both hands on the counter until I could trust my voice again. They used him to train you, I said. Owen did not answer. He did not need to. That was exactly what they had done. When I turned back, he was looking at the papers again. Natalie alive, condo records, LLC connections. Then he said very quietly, if she's alive, then why am I still here? That was the question. Not why did they do this? Not how could they? Why am I still here? Because that is the question that starts movement. I sat down again. Because this room works as long as you believe it should. He stared at me. That sounds simple. It isn't. No. We sat in silence. Then I said, there's more. He closed his eyes briefly, not because he did not want to hear it, because he did. That is another thing people misunderstand about trapped people. Sometimes they resist truth not because they are weak, because they know truth will require a whole new life on the other side of it. I slid the condo paperwork toward him. Marcus goes there, I said. Natalie lives there, or partly lives there. We watched him go in last night. He read the address twice. Then again. Claire said Marcus barely sees outside patients anymore. He sees enough. A slow understanding moved through his face. Not loud, not explosive, poisonous. They're together, yes. How long? We don't know yet. He laughed again, uglier this time, more alive. It was right there, he said. The whole time it was right there, and he stopped and pressed a hand to his mouth. That was when I saw it, the turn, from shame toward anger. Good, pain alone keeps people still. Anger can move them. You were manipulated, I said. I was stupid. No, I stayed. Yes, because you thought staying protected, Eli. He stared at me, then after a long pause, nodded once. That nod mattered. It meant he could still recognize motive in himself. Love, not just fear. And if love got him into the room, maybe love could help get him out. Then we heard tires in the driveway. Claire, too soon. I gathered the papers fast and slid them back into the envelope. What do I do? I asked. He looked toward the door. Go out the window, same as before, but listen. I waited. If you come back next time, he said, come with a plan. After I climbed back out of the guest house window for the second time in 3 days, I sat in my truck at the end of Claire's block and did not start the engine. The envelope with Natalie's photos and the condo records sat on the passenger seat like it had its own pulse. Claire's car was in the driveway. The kitchen light in the main house had turned on. The yellow bell still hung where it always hung. I just sat there looking at it. That stupid little bell. A thing so small, a thing so ordinary, and yet somehow it had become part of the architecture of fear. Then I heard Owen's last sentence in my head again. If you come back next time, come with a plan. That was the moment I stopped reacting and started building. I drove straight to Ruth's house. She opened the door before I even knocked. She had probably seen my truck from the window. He talked, she said. Yes. Good. Come in. Ruth's kitchen always smelled like lemon cleaner and old paper, like a librarian and a judge had raised a house together. She put coffee on without asking and sat me down under a ceiling light bright enough to make everybody look guilty. I told her everything. Natalie alive, the condo, Marcus going there, Owen's memory starting to crack, the blood feeling wrong, the line about Eli at the window, Claire telling him, this is what you destroy when you get selfish, the papers, the power of attorney angle, the fact that Owen no longer seemed sure the central story was true. Ruth listened without interrupting. That was one reason I trusted her. She never rushed to comfort when clarity was still possible. When I was done, she tapped her pen against the legal pad and said, all right, we know the emotional structure. Now we map the business. I stared at her. The business. Yes, because things like this do not stay alive for 5 years on fear alone. Fear gets it started. Money keeps it organized. She was right. I hated that she was right. We worked until almost midnight. Every transfer I had made, every early payment, every emergency support request, every extra envelope, every wire, every excuse Claire had ever used. At 11:35, the total sat on the page in Ruth's square, careful handwriting. $206,400. I looked at the number for a long time. That's a house, I said. It's a house, Ruth said. A condo, a private arrangement, and enough motive to keep a rotten system alive. I leaned back in the chair, because once the number was in front of me, I could not hide from it anymore. This had not just been manipulation. It had not just been panic. It had not just been a lie told too long. It had become an income stream. The next morning, Ruth made another call, then another, then another. By noon, she had brought in a man named Dennis Greer, a forensic accountant with a white beard, loud socks, and the kind of complete sentences only people who have spent years explaining fraud to rich fools know how to produce. He met us in a small office above a title company. Ruth gave him the short version. I gave him the dates. He took my records and started building a timeline on a whiteboard. Every December transfer from me, every emergency request from Claire, every vague bill tied to Marcus, the LLC formation, the condo purchase, Natalie's public appearances, the power of attorney draft, the shifts in billing language. He stood there for almost an hour drawing arrows and marking dates while Ruth and I watched. Then he stepped back and pointed to the center of the board. There, he said. What? Year 3. I looked. December payment from me. 2 weeks later, movement into an account tied to the LLC. A little over a month later, closing activity begins on the condo. Then another billing spike from Marcus's office. Then public traces of Natalie using the same connected network. I stared at the board. They were building another life. With your money, Dennis said, or at least with enough of your money to make it possible. The room went quiet. Then I asked the question that had been growing in me all morning. If Marcus already had a practice, why would he need this? Dennis uncapped another marker. Fraud is not always about need, he said. Sometimes it is about conversion. If a man has authority and no conscience, he can turn trust into cash more easily than most people can earn a paycheck. That sentence stayed with me. Turn trust into cash. That was exactly what they had done. By late afternoon, Dennis had done more than confirm theft. He had found leverage. The money had moved too cleanly in some places and too carelessly in others. My support payments lined up too neatly with their personal improvements. Some of the LLC expenses made no sense. Some of the transfers looked circular, like money being washed through structure before coming back into ordinary life. Still not enough for a perfect case, but enough to put pressure on them, enough to scare them. And scared people talk. That same night, Ruth called me just before 10. I found something else. Her voice had that tone again. The one that meant the world had not improved. What? Marcus drafted a power of attorney package 3 months ago. For who? For Owen. I gripped the phone harder. What kind of power of attorney? Durable, financial authority language, capacity-related review language, mental fitness contingencies. I sat down on the side of my bed. That was not just greed anymore. That was planning. Planning for permanence. They were getting ready to take legal control of what little he still had, Ruth said. The old savings bond from Evelyn's mother. The investment account his grandfather started when he was a kid. His share of the house. What was left of retirement money. Small things by some standards. Everything by predatory standards. Harvesting his legal identity. That is the phrase Ruth used later. And once she said it, I could not stop hearing it. The next morning I went back to Owen. Not with emotion first, not with rage, with papers, Natalie's photos, condo records, LLC links, the power of attorney draft, the billing timeline, my transfer history, the behavior notes, and one other thing Dennis had prepared for me, a clean, simple timeline, just dates, no dramatic language, no moral interpretation, no speeches. Sometimes the most devastating thing in the world is a straight line. I came through the side again, same fence, same shadow, same yellow bell hanging there like a bad joke. Owen opened quickly. He looked different again, not better exactly, sharper. Like doubt had started stripping obedience out of him one layer at a time. You came back, he said. I told you I would. He looked at the envelope. With a plan? Not the whole thing, but something. Yes, he let me in. This time he sat faster, not because he was comfortable, because he was ready. I laid the documents out one by one. This isn't for you to memorize, I said. It's for you to see. Then I walked him through it. The clinic discharge after 4 months, the condo timeline, the LLC connection, Natalie alive, Marcus tied to Natalie, the power of attorney draft, my money lining up with their life. He listened in total silence. At the condo record, his jaw tightened. At the power of attorney draft, he blinked like he had taken a hit. At the timeline, he stared so long at the spacing between dates that I realized numbers were hitting him harder than explanation. Finally, he asked, why the power of attorney? Because they wanted a cleaner grip. On what? On you. He laughed once. Short, bitter. There wasn't much left of me. That's not true. He looked around the room. Dad, look where I am. I'm looking at a room, I said, not the measure of you. Something moved in his face when I said that. Pain maybe, or maybe just the shock of being spoken to like a person instead of a managed problem. Then he looked back at the papers. If they finish this, he said slowly, they could make decisions in my name. Yes, medical. Yes, financial. Yes, parental. I hesitated. Potentially, yes. He stared down at the draft again. Then he folded it once, very neatly, set it down and said, then they were never planning to let me out. There it was, the sentence. Not because I told him, because he finally said it. That matters. A lot. It is one thing for somebody outside the trap to tell you you're trapped. It is another thing entirely to see the bars yourself. We sat there a long time after that. Then he said, I want to know exactly what happened with Natalie. We're trying. No, I mean exactly, before anything else. That was fair. He could not walk out of the room while the original lie still had any power over him. So I asked him to go back again, carefully, slowly. What do you remember most clearly? He looked toward the wall. Claire wasn't home when Natalie came over. That part is true. Natalie was strange from the start. Too bright, too sharp. Too calm for someone picking a real fight. She kept saying things that pushed exactly where I was weakest. She wanted me angry. I can feel that now. He rubbed his thumb against his palm. I remember shoving her. I remember her falling. I remember blood. But now the blood feels too immediate, like it arrived before the panic had time to. Could it have been fake? He exhaled hard. I don't know. I hate that I don't know. Then he gave me another detail. She had a scar, small burn scar, left wrist, from a curling iron when she was a teenager. If you find a close enough photo, check for it. That was my son. Still observant. Still detail-oriented, still himself in places they had not fully stripped. I wrote it down. Then I asked the question that actually mattered next. If we prove Natalie was part of this from the beginning, and we prove Marcus and Claire used that guilt to keep you here, would you help us make them say it? He looked at me. How? Recording, controlled conversation, police involved. Real police? Yes. Not Marcus's kind of managed? No, real. He looked down at the papers, then at the bed, then at the cards on the wall, then back at me. If I do that and they admit it, what happens? They get charged. And me? I did not answer fast enough. He saw that immediately. That's what I thought. So I answered the only honest way I could. If Natalie is alive, the story changes. If the scene was staged, that matters. If Marcus exploited a vulnerable patient for money and control, that matters. If Claire kept you isolated through deception, that matters. And if you were medicated, manipulated, and kept inside a false guilt structure for years, that matters too. He watched me carefully. That's not the same as saying I'm safe. No, I said. It isn't. We sat with that. Then he asked the question that hit me the hardest. Would you stay if I had done it? I answered right away. Yes. Would you hate me? No. You don't know that? I do. He looked away. So I said the part he needed to hear. If you shoved someone and she died, I would still be your father. I'd be angry, hurt, furious about what you hid, furious about what they built around you, but I would still be your father. That was never negotiable. He breathed in once, shakily. No one ever said it like that. Of course they had not. Conditional love is too useful to people like Marcus and Claire. Do this or lose everything. Stay quiet or the child pays. Obey or the world collapses. Unconditional love ruins that math. Then I shifted to something practical. I need your routine. He looked up. What? I need the machine. Every bell, every phrase, every reward, every punishment, every pattern. That made sense to him immediately in a way emotional language had not. So he started listing. 1 bell means stop talking. 2 bells means sit on the bed with hands visible. No bell, But Claire opening the door twice in under 10 seconds means Marcus is there and wants a controlled intake. If Marcus says, "How is your tone today?" he suspects resistance. If Claire says, "Eli had a full day," there will be no child reward that week. If Marcus says, "You're thinking selfishly," he wants the journal rewritten. If tea comes instead of water, medication has been adjusted. If Claire uses my full name, she's angry. If Marcus starts saying "we" too often, he's building toward a threat. I wrote all of it down. Not therapy. Protocol. At one point he stopped and looked at me. "Do normal people have to explain their captivity like this?" "No." He nodded like even that hurt. Then he said, very quietly, "Okay." "What do you mean, okay?" "Okay, we do it." That was the moment the plan became real. Not because I wanted it, because he chose it. The bell rang once outside. He did not move. That mattered. A lot. 3 days earlier, one bell turned him silent. Now he just looked toward the sound and then back at me. "They'll notice if I stop obeying perfectly," he said, "but I'm done giving them that for free." Once Owen said yes, the whole thing changed temperature. Up to that point, it had been grief, suspicion, paperwork, and rage held together with timing. After that, yes, it became a countdown. Not dramatic at first. Practical. Those are often the most dangerous countdowns, the kind with folders, duplicate copies, battery checks, and people speaking very calmly in rooms where everyone knows one mistake could blow the whole thing open too early. I came back out the guest house window again. Same awful little ritual. Out into the yard, along the fence, back to the truck. Ruth was waiting where she always waited, engine off, chin lifted, watching the mirrors. "Well," she said the second I got in. "He in?" "Yes." "Really in?" "Yes." She started the truck. "Good." Then we stopped playing private detective and start using people with legal teeth. That was how Detective Neil Carver entered the story. Ruth knew him through an old land fraud case. He worked financial crimes now, mid-50s. Broad shoulders gone a little soft with age, but not enough to make him harmless. Haircut too short for vanity, voice low, the kind of man who does not need to sound important because his paperwork already is. We met him after hours at a county annex office, not the main station, smaller building, side entrance, fluorescent lights that made everybody look guilty and tired. I told him the full story. He did not interrupt, did not offer sympathy, did not perform outrage. He just listened. Then when I finished, he asked 3 questions. "Do you have copies of all transfers?" "Yes." "Is the alleged victim from the original incident verifiably alive?" "Almost certainly." "And is your son willing to speak on record and participate in a controlled contact operation?" "Yes." He leaned back and folded his hands. "Then you do not have a family misunderstanding," he said. "You have fraud, coercive confinement, medical exploitation, and probably enough financial movement to interest people with less patience than me." That was the first thin strand of relief I had felt in days. Not because justice had arrived. Because the thing finally had names outside my own rage. Carver spent the next hour going through every piece: discharge notice, behavior sheets, power of attorney draft, condo records, Natalie alive, the LLC, my transfers, the Bell routine, the child leverage, the logs, the journal structure, Marcus's earlier court language, everything. At the power of attorney draft, he said, "This tells me they were planning for permanence." At the behavior logs, he said, "This tells me they thought no one serious would ever read them." At the child-related reinforcement language, he just looked up and said, "The adults in that house should be very careful what they say next." The table looked like a paper version of slow violence. No blood in the present, but years taken, a life hollowed out. "How do we do it?" I asked. He looked at the notes Ruth and I had taken from Owen. "We get them comfortable enough to explain themselves." Ruth nodded. "Same thing I said." "Yes," Carver said. "Annoying when you write this often." She did not reward that. The plan formed in layers. We could not rush in and remove Owen before the evidentiary spine was strong enough. If we moved too early, Marcus and Claire would pivot, claim consensual home recovery, claim unconventional therapeutic structure, claim Owen was unstable and I was interfering, claim family stress had distorted everything. A decent defense lawyer could make a mess out of good facts if the timing was wrong. So we needed them to say it themselves. Not every detail, but enough. Enough to connect money to confinement, enough to prove Natalie was part of the lie, enough to show that Owen's guilt had been cultivated, not treated, enough to show Eli had been used as leverage, enough to make the room, the bell, the journals, the child rewards, and the financial motive impossible to explain away as some strange but legitimate therapy. And the center of that plan was Owen. That truth hurt, because I wanted to be the one to confront them. I wanted Marcus looking at me when the lie broke. I wanted Claire hearing every number from my own mouth. But my outrage was not the useful tool. My son was. He was the one inside the structure. He was the one whose questions could make them explain themselves. He was the one they still believed they could manage. That was the opening. Carver brought in 2 more people. One was Dana Morrow from the prosecutor's office. Early 40s, sharp eyes, hair pulled back tight. The kind of person who looked like she had no time for people who confuse feelings with facts. She specialized in coercive control and financial exploitation cases. I did not even know that was its own corner of the law until she started talking. She explained something important very quickly. Juries understand cages best when they can see bars, she said. The problem here is the bars are emotional, medical, financial, and parental all at once. So we have to show the system, not just the room. That mattered, because the blue door was only the visible part. The real prison had been built out of guilt, medication, a child, and money. The other person was Aaron Bell, tech support. Young enough that at first I thought he might be an intern. Then he started unpacking covert audio equipment with the calm confidence of someone who trusted wires more than people. He laid out the options: body wire under Owen's shirt, backup audio from outside, secondary live feed in case of interference, time-stamped recording, reserve units nearby in case physical danger kicked in. Listening to him describe all that while thinking about my son sitting in a locked room waiting for a yellow bell made the whole thing feel unreal for a moment, like I had accidentally wandered into a procedural drama. Then Dana asked the question that pulled it right back into reality. Can Owen hold the line under pressure? Silence. Not because we did not understand the question. Because none of us knew the answer. He wants this, I said. That matters, she replied. But it's not the same as being able to stay outside their script once they start using guilt, fear, and Eli. There it was again. Always Eli. Every path through that house eventually ran through him. So we did the only thing that made sense. We trained. The next 2 days were not dramatic. They were exhausting. Carver found us a neutral interview room through the county. We brought Owen in under careful timing. Not too often, not enough for Claire to notice a pattern, but enough. The first time he walked into that room, he stood by the wall for a long time before sitting. Not because he was afraid of us, because free space confused him. Dana saw it immediately. Do you want the chair by the wall or the chair by the door? He looked at both like it was a trick. The wall. Of course, people who have spent years being watched choose walls when they can. Less exposure, fewer blind spots, more control over the room. That first session was not about the crime. It was about rhythm. When does Claire soften her voice? When does Marcus get colder? What phrases mean danger? What phrases mean false calm? What makes them defensive? What do they expect from you when they feel in control? What do they fear when you are calm? That last one changed something. They don't like it when I'm calm first, Owen said. Why? Because then they can't be the steady ones. Dana nodded slowly. Good, that's useful. He looked at her. Useful how? Because people like that need to be the emotional reference point. If you stop reacting the way they expect, they either over-explain or over-correct. Either way, they help us. So we built the conversational ladder. Not word for word. Dana hated exact scripts. Real people do not talk in legal paragraphs when their lives are threatened. Instead, we built steps. Step 1. Owen tells them he knows enough to stop pretending. Step 2. He does not reveal how he knows. Step 3. He asks questions that sound emotional but carry evidentiary weight. Why did you keep me here? Was I ever actually dangerous? How long were you and Natalie involved? What was the money really for? Was there ever a real plan to let me see Eli? Why the power of attorney? Step 4. He stays as still as possible, not passive. Still. Let them feel silence. Let them justify. Let them reveal contempt. Step 5. If they push guilt back onto him, he keeps returning to facts. Step 6. If physical danger starts, he uses the code phrase and the police move. We needed a code phrase that would sound natural in his mouth, not something theatrical. At first, Aaron suggested something generic. Dana rejected it immediately. Ruth suggested using Eli's name inside a sentence that would sound believable. We tested options. I miss Eli. Too natural. Could happen by accident. I need Eli. Too sharp. Tell Eli the truth. Possible. Then Owen, sitting there with both hands wrapped around a paper cup, said quietly, "What about this?" He looked down and said, "If you really cared about Eli, you would stop." The room went still. That was it. Natural enough, sharp enough, emotionally believable, and not something that would slip out by accident. So that became the code phrase. If you really cared about Eli, you would stop. Aaron had everyone repeat it, then played it back, then checked signal levels, then tested distortion. He clipped the sample mic and explained everything to Owen carefully. This goes under the collar seam. Do not touch it. Do not pat your chest if you feel it. People always pat hidden things. Just breathe normally and let your shoulders stay loose. Breathe normally, Dana muttered. Sure, in a room where his wife and his doctor may confess to stealing 5 years of his life. Aaron shrugged. Worse audio has won worse cases. That almost got a real laugh out of Owen. Almost. What helped more than the gear were the rehearsals. The first time Dana played Claire and opened with, "Owen, your tone is already slipping," he folded immediately. Shoulders in, eyes down, apology reflex. He started explaining himself before the fake accusation had even finished. Dana stopped the role play at once. "No, that's the old structure." "I don't know another one," he said. That sentence sat in the room. No drama, no speech. Just truth. So we built another one. Not swagger, not performance. Clarity. When Claire says your tone is slipping, Dana asked, what is the real question underneath that? He thought for a second. Whether I'm under control. Good, then answer that, not the fake line. How? If she says your tone is slipping, don't apologize for tone. Say, you mean I'm not doing what you expected. He tried it. At first it sounded borrowed, unnatural, like he was wearing somebody else's coat. By the fourth repetition, it sounded like him. Dry, tired, sharp in a way that did not need volume. That was the version of my son I had not seen in years. The man underneath the room. Marcus took longer. His authority lived in calm language. That made him more dangerous. Carver played Marcus during the rehearsals because his voice had the right kind of dead calm. Owen, you are confusing emotional agitation with insight. The first time Carver said that line, I watched old training hit my son like muscle memory. He shrank under it. Dana stopped immediately. What is he really saying? Owen rubbed his face. That my understanding isn't valid unless he approves it. Exactly, so answer that. Again. Owen, you are confusing emotional agitation with insight. This time Owen looked straight at Carver and said, no, I'm separating your language from what happened to me. The room went quiet for half a second. There it was. Not polished. Not flashy, but real. By the end of the second day, he could hold 3 or 4 minutes of confrontation without falling into apology, silence, or self-erasure. That might not sound like much. For a man who had spent 5 years being corrected by a bell and rewarded with access to his child, it was huge. There were setbacks too. One of the rehearsal sessions nearly broke all of us. Dana, testing his trigger response, looked at him and said, if you make trouble now, Eli is the one who pays. Owen physically stopped breathing, not metaphorically, actually stopped. His face went white, hands shook, eyes unfocused. I stood up so fast my chair hit the wall. Dana held up a hand. No one touch him. Then she looked straight at Owen and said, look at me. What year is it? He swallowed hard. This year. Whose room are you in? County Annex. Who controls the door? You do. Who decides whether you see Eli? He said nothing. She asked again. Who decides whether you see Eli? This time he got there. No one in this room. Again. No one in this room. By the third time, he could breathe again. That session wrecked me. I sat in my truck afterward with both hands over my face thinking one sentence can still stop his lungs. That is what they did to him. They got into his nervous system, into reflex, into breath. That night, I almost drove back to the condo and ruined my life. Ruth called before I could. How close are you to doing something that would make me fill out forms? Unclear. Good. Stay unclear till morning. That is friendship sometimes, not comfort. Interruption. On the third prep day, Dennis found another useful thread tied to Natalie. A travel dispute and civil filing. Shared itinerary information linking her to Marcus a year earlier. Dana decided not to lead with it. Too much too early could make them shut down. Instead, Owen would start from his side. I know I was never really in treatment. I know Natalie is alive. I know the money was not for me. I know there was never going to be a release. Then, he would let them fill the silence. If they believed he only had partial information, they would try to manage it. Management is confession, wearing clean clothes. The final rehearsal ran almost 4 hours. By then, everyone was exhausted. That helped, strangely. Exhaustion strips away performance and leaves only the strongest lines standing. At one point, Carver, playing Marcus, said, you are spiraling because guilt always needs a villain to survive. And Owen, without rehearsal, answered, no. Guilt needed you because you charged rent for it. The room went quiet. Dana wrote it down immediately. Keep that one. Later, with Ruth playing Claire, she snapped, you should be thanking me. I protected your son from what you are. And Owen said, perfectly naturally, if you really cared about Eli, you would stop. Code phrase, clean, sharp, believable. Carver looked at Aaron. Signal on that line. Aaron checked. Clear as a bell, he said, then winced. Nobody laughed. On the morning of the operation, I went to the shop and tried to work. Completely useless. At 11, I gave up and went home. Owen was already there under quiet transport through Carver, sitting at my kitchen table with a mug of real coffee in his hands. He kept smelling it before he drank. That got to me. Like ordinary sensory things had become special again. For a while, we just sat there. No legal talk, no plan, no strategy, no bell, no room. Just father and son in a kitchen that should have held more mornings like that. Then he asked, did Mom know something was wrong? That question landed hard. I thought about Evelyn stirring tea, about the night she asked if I believed them, about all the times I chose easier trust over harder action. Yes, I said finally. Not all of it, but enough to be uneasy. He nodded slowly. She always saw through people faster than you. That would have been funny in another life. Yeah, I said. She did. He took a sip of coffee, set the mug down, then asked what I had been dreading. Would she forgive me for staying gone? I leaned back in my chair. Your mother had a lot of gifts. Patience when it mattered, anger when it was earned, terrible taste in mystery novels. But her strongest gift was this. She knew the difference between someone who had done wrong and someone who had been made useful to wrong people. So yes, she would forgive you faster than either of us would forgive ourselves. He looked down at the table for a long time after that. Then he said, I don't know what I am if I'm not the version they built. That scared me more than anything else all week, because confessions and arrests are one kind of problem. Identity after captivity is another. So I answered as honestly as I could. You're my son. You're Eli's father. You're a man who got trapped inside other people's decisions and survived longer than they expected. The rest we build again. He nodded. No speech, no drama, just a nod. At 3 p.m, Aaron fitted the wire, small unit under the shirt seam, secondary mount near the collar, backup battery taped flat, signal checked from the vehicle, spare recorder ready. Dana ran the sequence one last time. You begin calm. You do not accuse too fast. You ask why. You ask how long. You ask about the money. You ask whether any of this was ever really for Eli. You stay with facts. If they threaten you, touch you, or the room shifts, you use the line. Owen repeated it once. If you really cared about Eli, you would stop. No shake. Good. At 4:30, Carver's team moved into position. Unmarked units. Plainclothes officers nearby. Aaron on tech. Dana with primary feed. Carver running the operation. Ruth in the second vehicle with me, because there was no version of reality where she was staying home for this. Just before transport, Owen stood by my truck with one hand on the door and looked at me like something was still unsaid. Then he asked, if they deny everything, what happens? I answered immediately. Then we keep going, but they won't. Not once they start needing to explain you. He held my gaze. I hope you're right. Me too. Then he got in. The last drive to Claire's house felt shorter than all the others. Not because the roads changed, because waiting changes distance. Owen sat in the back of Carver's sedan with both hands flat on his thighs. He used to sit like that in church as a teenager when he was trying very hard to look patient. He wore a dark button shirt over the wire because Aaron said layers help break the outline. No jacket, too bulky, too suspicious. When we turned onto Claire's street, Owen looked out the window once, just once. Then he looked forward again. Carver parked 2 houses down from the main property, close to where I had watched from before. Only now there were other cars placed around the block in ways that looked ordinary unless you knew better. A delivery van, a dark SUV with no markings, a compact sedan with a woman pretending to scroll on her phone, an old pickup that looked exactly like the kind of truck nobody notices. Plain clothes, quiet faces, people trained not to look like what they were. Ruth sat beside me in the second vehicle with one earbud in and her arms folded. She had on a dark coat and practical shoes. She looked like she might be attending either a zoning hearing or an execution and had not yet decided which. At 6:48, Aaron checked the signal. "You're clean," he said into the line. "Say something natural." There was a pause. Then Owen answered from inside the guest house. "I don't think I have anything natural left." For one second I almost laughed. So did Ruth, I think. But nobody let it all the way out. The guest house light came on at 6:51. One lamp in the outer room, one lamp in the back room, soft yellow through the curtains, same house, same yard, same blue door. And yet the whole block felt different now, like the pressure in the air had changed. At 6:57 the bell rang once. In my ear I heard Owen inhale. Then nothing. That had been part of the plan. Small resistance first, not dramatic, not obvious, just enough not to give them perfect obedience for free. At 7:03, Claire crossed the yard carrying the usual tray and one of those woven bags she liked to use. Her walk was exactly what it had always been, measured, unhurried, confident. That bothered me more than if she had looked nervous. Nervous people still understand consequences. Claire looked like routine. She opened the blue door and went inside. The audio shifted, door closing, tray touching wood, fabric moving, then Claire's voice. "You're sitting in the wrong chair," Owen answered calmly. "Maybe I got tired of the right one." Silence, the first real pause. Small, but there. "What does that mean?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "Sit down." Another pause, then the scrape of a chair. I looked at Carver through the windshield. He held up one finger. "Wait." Claire tried again. "How was your afternoon?" I heard Owen breathe once before answering. "Interesting," Ruth whispered beside me. "Good. Make them fill the air." That is the trick with people like Claire and Marcus. They hate empty space they do not control. If you do not rush to explain yourself, they rush to manage the moment instead. Inside the guest house, Claire did exactly that. "Marcus will be here soon," she said. "I told him your mood has been inconsistent lately. If that is because of your father circling around again, you need to tell me now." My whole body went cold at that line. She had noticed something. Maybe not me exactly, maybe just movement around the edges of the story, but enough. Owen did not react. "How long have you known Natalie was alive?" The silence after that felt physical. I gripped the door handle hard enough to hurt my hand. Claire gave a short laugh. Thin. Sharp. Wrong. "What are you talking about?" "You heard me." "Nothing." Then Owen again, same calm voice. "How long have you known Natalie was alive?" This time Claire did not laugh. "Who has been talking to you?" There it was. Not an answer. A tell. I looked toward Dana's car. Even from the angle, I could tell she was riding fast. Owen kept his voice low. "For years you told me I was dangerous. You told me guilt was the only honest thing left in me. You told me what happened that night could never be undone. Now I want the truth." Chairs moved. Harder this time. "Owen," Claire said, and there it was. The warning version of his name. The dangerous one. "You are agitated. This is exactly why contact and overstimulation were restricted." He did not rise to it. "No, this is why they were restricted." I heard her breathing change. Faster now, less polished. "You don't understand what you're saying." "Then help me understand." The guest house door opened. Footsteps. Different ones. Steady. Confident. Marcus. He came in without hurry. That detail still lives under my skin. He did not sound surprised. He sounded irritated. "What is this?" Marcus asked. Owen answered before Claire could. "This is me asking what I should have asked 5 years ago." Another chair moved. Marcus sat. Then he used the tone. That same expensive, calm, low voice he had used in my living room years earlier. "Owen, when a patient begins to confuse emotional activation with clarity, the safest thing to do is slow the conversation down." There it was. The old language, the old key. Only this time my son did not fold. "No," Owen said. "What you mean is that when I start separating your language from what happened to me, you lose the room." Marcus paused. Then he asked, softer now, more dangerous. "Who has been coaching you?" "No one. I just finally got tired of hearing your version first." Claire cut in. "Did Thomas put you up to this?" Owen ignored it. "Was Natalie ever dead?" That was the turn. Not because of the answer, because of the pause before the answer. Neither of them denied it. Not right away. Not fast enough. Not with the kind of immediate disgust innocent people usually show when a question is absurd. Instead, there was thinking, choosing, measuring. Then Marcus said carefully, "We need to be very precise now." Owen did not let him take the wheel. "Precise is easy. Is Natalie alive?" Claire answered before Marcus could stop her. "You're asking the wrong question." There, another tell. Not no, never no. Then ask me the right one, Owen said. More movement. One of them stood. Then sat again. The right question is this, Owen said. How long were you both planning to keep me in here? No answer. Then Marcus tried to reframe. Your condition has always distorted time. Again, not no, not false, not absurd. Reframing. Owen stayed with facts. I saw the condo records. I saw the LLC. I saw Natalie's picture. I saw the draft power of attorney. That hit them hard. Claire's voice came too fast. You went through our paperwork. Our paperwork. Ownership language. Shared control. Shared system. Owen kept going. You put legal language around me like I was already gone. You put money around me like I was an account. You put my son outside this room and called it treatment. Marcus said, Owen, listen carefully. No, Owen said. You listen carefully. Was I ever really dangerous to Eli? The room went dead silent. 3 full seconds. Then Claire, in a voice stripped almost clean of performance, said, Not in the way you think. There it was. Not denial. Never denial. Owen pushed. Then tell me the way you mean. Marcus tried for professional ground one more time. You were unstable, profoundly vulnerable, prone to guilt spirals, identity collapse, emotional overattachment. That isn't the question, Owen said. Was I ever a danger to my son? Again the pause. Then Marcus exhaled and said it. No. Quiet. Flat. Final no. Not a danger. Not really. Not in the way they had made him believe for 5 years. Owen's voice shook once. Just once. Then why was I here? And that was the real point of no return. Because innocent people protect themselves with truth. Guilty people protect themselves with justification. And once justification starts, confession is usually not far behind. Claire started first. Because you were impossible. Not sick, not broken, not dangerous. Impossible. You were a constant collapse, she went on. Every day was guilt. Every hour was questions. You wouldn't work, you wouldn't parent, you wouldn't sleep. You just sat there drowning in yourself and expecting everyone else to drown with you. The words came faster now, hotter. Years of buried contempt finally seeing air. We kept things together. We kept Eli stable. We kept your father from falling apart after Evelyn got sick. We did the work while you disappeared. Inside, Owen spoke quieter than before. So you locked me in a room. Nobody answered directly. Then Marcus said, we contained a liability. Liability. That word hit harder than impossible. Not patient, not husband, not father. Liability. Owen kept going. And the money. Claire laughed once, cold, no warmth in it at all. There it is, money. She had reached the point where pretending disgusted her more than truth did. Your father paid because he needed to believe he was helping someone. You stayed because it made you feel useful. Marcus kept the structure clean. I kept the house clean. Everybody got something. Everybody. Owen asked the next one exactly the way Dana had trained him. And Natalie, Marcus tried to answer. Claire beat him to it. Natalie solved the first problem. Then Marcus, too smooth and too late, added, she also understood discretion. Owen stayed still. The first problem was me believing I killed her. No answer. Then silence. He let it sit. Finally, Marcus said, you believed what your state allowed you to believe. There was the whole philosophy. Not you were mistaken. Not we lied. Not we manipulated you. Your state allowed it. As if my son's panic had been an open account they could pull from. Owen's voice came thinner now. Did she fake the blood? Marcus did not answer. Claire did. Some of it. Owen kept going. The fall, Claire said. Real enough. Not fatal. Not even close. You did shove her. That part was yours. Marcus added, it gave us leverage. The rest came from timing. Timing. Always timing. Everything with them came back to timing. Owen asked, how long were you together? Marcus stayed quiet. Claire answered, long before you noticed. She sounded almost bored. That was what made her feel evil to me in that moment. Not rage, not insanity. Boredom. Marcus and I had what you and I never did. A functioning mind between us. Owen breathed in through his nose. So all 5 years were for money, Marcus said. No, at first it was for containment. Money made it sustainable. That answer chilled me worse than the first confessions, because it meant greed had grown on top of cruelty. It had not created it. They built the room first, then learned how well the room paid. What about Eli? Owen asked. Everything turned again. Because once the child enters the center of the conversation, the selfishness stops dressing itself up properly. Claire sounded irritated. What about him? You used him. No, we protected him from instability. Marcus added. The child functioned as motivational structure. Then Owen asked the question he had really been building toward the whole time. Was there ever a point where you were going to let me be his father again? No one spoke. Then Claire said, not if you kept needing this much management. Marcus added, we considered phased contact under authority review. Authority review by who? Owen asked. Marcus answered, by the person legally positioned to assess your capacity. There it was. Power of attorney, capacity, parental control, legal permanence. Claire snapped then, maybe because the lie was already dead. Do you know how exhausting you were? Do you know what it took to make every day in this room predictable? The meds, the schedules, the rewrites, the journals, the bell. Every single thing had to be managed because you couldn't be trusted to stay in one version of yourself for more than an afternoon. She said it herself. The bell. No euphemism. No soft wording. The bell. We had it. Then Owen asked the one that broke whatever illusion of moral defense they had left. And my father, what was he to you? Marcus said nothing. Claire answered instantly. A wallet with feelings. Owen did not gasp, did not shout. He just asked, almost gently, did either of you ever mean to let him know where I was? Claire actually laughed. Why would we? He was easiest when he was grieving and useful. Later he was easiest when he was hopeful and paying. At that point, Owen had more than enough. But people in pain do not always stop at the strategic point. Sometimes they stop where the heart catches, and his heart caught exactly where I was afraid it would. "What happens to Eli now?" Marcus answered first. "If you keep making this dramatic, he gets destabilized again." There it was, the old move, child as threat, child as punishment, child as leash. Owen stayed with it. "No, what was your plan?" "Really?" Silence. Then Claire, perhaps believing he was already too broken to matter, said the thing that froze my blood. "The original plan was boarding school in 2 years. Then your father could keep paying into whatever structure we set up, and Eli would grow out of asking questions." Boarding school. Not because he needed education, because distance would finish what the room had started. Owen's next words were almost too quiet to hear. "You were going to erase me." Claire did not deny it. "You were already mostly erased." I think that was the moment my son stopped being afraid of them. Not because courage exploded out of nowhere, because clarity finally outweighed survival. His next question did not shake at all. "Was there ever any part of this that had anything to do with care?" Marcus answered first. Cold, final. "Care is just control with a conscience. We removed the conscience part years ago." Then Owen asked the last planned question, "And tomorrow?" Claire answered because by then they had stopped pretending there was still a future where elegance mattered. "Tomorrow we sign the final transfer. Marcus closes the capacity review. You stay quiet, and by next month this whole arrangement becomes simpler." Simpler. Meaning legal. Meaning final. Meaning permanent. Then Owen said the line that shifted everything from confession to danger. "That isn't happening. Not anymore." The silence changed immediately. Sharper now. Moving. Marcus's voice dropped. "Who have you spoken to?" No answer. Claire cut in. "Did Thomas see something? Did that old man go through our files?" Owen said. "I know enough," Marcus asked. "Enough for what?" "Enough to know I was never the patient in this room. I was the product." The room changed around that word. You could hear it. Movement. Fabric. One chair pushed back hard. Then Marcus, voice flat and dangerous, said, "Stand up." "No." "Stand up, Owen." "No." Then Claire, stripped clean now, all fury. "Do not do this. Do not blow up what kept you safe." The cage called safety. Same lie, just thinner now. Owen answered steadily enough to make my eyes burn. "Safe is not a locked room with a bell. Safe is not hearing my son through a wall. Safe is not being told I deserve to disappear." Then Marcus said something that changed everything from legally useful to immediately dangerous. "Take off your shirt." "No," Owen said. "Take it off." "Why?" "Because I want to see whether Thomas got brave enough to wire his own son." Inside the guest house, footsteps. Close. Fast. "Don't touch me," Owen said. Marcus again closer. "Then let me see," Claire added. "If you make this worse, Eli is the one who pays for it." There, the child again, and Owen said the phrase. "If you really cared about Eli, you would stop." Everything moved at once. Carver was out of his vehicle before the sentence finished. Dana was on comms instantly. Aaron called the signal live and secure. The plainclothes units converged from both sides. The delivery van opened. The woman in the compact sedan moved across the yard fast. But what I heard in my ear before I reached the blue door was the sound that had haunted me for days. The bell. Not once, twice, fast, violent. Then Owen shouting, not in fear, in pain. The first officer hit the blue door with his shoulder before I got there. It burst inward. The room exploded with sound. Police. Hands where I can see them. Do not move. Down. Now. Marcus had one fist twisted in Owen's shirt near the collar. Claire was half turned toward the back room like she might run or grab something, or maybe just physically flee reality now that she could not control it. The officers took Marcus first. Fast, ugly, professional, arm behind his back, face into the desk, chair over, papers everywhere. The polished calm disappeared in under 2 seconds. Claire did not fight right away. She just stared, then started saying, "This is insane," over and over in a thin little voice that sounded nothing like the woman who had managed my son with a bell. I crossed the room and got to Owen before anybody could stop me. His collar was torn where Marcus had grabbed for the wire. One side of his neck was already reddening. But he was standing. I put both hands on his shoulders. "I'm here," I said. He looked at me, and for one split second I saw all of him at once. The boy at the shop, the man after the construction accident, the father hearing his child through walls, the son who had asked me if I would still stay if the worst thing were true. Then the present took over, and he broke. Not neatly, not quietly. He folded against me with a sound I still hear sometimes at night. Not exactly crying, the sound a body makes when fear leaves too fast and pain rushes in after it. "It's over," I said into his hair. "It's over, it's over." Behind us the room kept moving. An officer bagged the bell logs. Another took photos of the binders, the medications, the room layout, the desk. Dana stepped inside far enough to hear Claire's half-hysterical explanations and wrote the whole time. "This was for him," Claire was saying. "You don't understand. You never saw what he was like before. Marcus was helping. We were helping." Marcus said nothing at first, because he was calculating. I could almost see him shifting in real time from doctor to defendant. Then he looked at Owen and said the single most self-destroying thing left in him. "You could have kept the arrangement." Arrangement. Not care, not treatment. Arrangement. Claire started crying then. Real tears maybe. Maybe not. I did not care. They led Marcus out first. His face had that look some educated men get when reality finally lays a hand on them. Not remorse. Insult. He caught sight of me on the way out. "This could have stayed private," he said. "Private," I said. "You mean profitable." Marcus said nothing after that. Claire came next. She had switched into that awful little injured voice, the one built to sound misunderstood. Thomas, please, you know Owen. You know how he can get. You know he isn't always reliable. I looked at her. Maybe the strangest thing about evil is how ordinary the face still is after the structure breaks. Same eyes, same skin, same mouth that once thanked me for bringing pie on Christmas. No, I said. I know how he sounded through a wall when you trained him with a bell. That shut her up. Once the room had cleared enough for breath again, Dana asked Owen one formal question in front of witnesses. Do you feel safe leaving this room tonight? He looked around. The bed, the cards, the desk, the journals, the life compressed into management. Then he said, No, I feel safe leaving it forever. By 9:43, the blue door stood open. Not as part of a system, as evidence. The bell had been bagged, the medications logged, the binders seized, the power of attorney draft taken from Claire's office inside the house after warrant support moved quickly once the live confessions locked probable cause into place. I watched officers carry boxes out while neighbors stared through curtains and porch shadows. Later, some of them would probably tell themselves they had always sensed something was off. People do that. They rewrite the past to make themselves feel less blind. But the truth is, nobody on that street saw it. Not clearly. Not enough. That is how systems like this survive, not just through predators, through ordinary life around them. At 10:12, Ruth brought Eli over from the neighbor's place where child services had kept him while the scene was secured. She crouched in front of him first. Your dad is safe. Your grandpa is safe. You did the right thing telling the truth. He nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the yard. Then he saw Owen, really saw him, not as a voice through wood, not as a hidden shadow, out in the open, under the sky. Children do not always run in moments like that. Sometimes they freeze first because reality comes back bigger than expected. That is what Eli did. He stopped, held the zipper of his little jacket, looked at Owen, then at me, then back at Owen. My son dropped to one knee in the grass. He did not open his arms, did not call him over, did not make the moment about his own need. He just said, "Hi, buddy." Eli stood there for another 2 seconds. Then he walked forward, slow at first, then faster. Then all at once he was in Owen's arms, and my son was shaking so hard I thought his bones might come apart. I looked away for a second, because some things are too sacred to witness straight on after too much ugliness. Behind us, the system kept moving. One officer asked where the rest of the financial files were. Claire answered in a dead voice. Marcus asked for counsel. Dana kept writing. Carver kept directing. But out in the yard, under a bad porch light and an open sky, something simpler happened. A father held his son. A son held his child. And the room behind them stopped being the center of the story. It became the crime scene. After a while, Eli pulled back and touched the torn collar of Owen's shirt. "Did the doctor man hurt you?" Owen closed his eyes for half a second. "No, buddy," he said. "Not anymore." That line should have ended the night. In some ways it did. But reality kept moving. Carver took my preliminary statement in the kitchen of the main house, while officers photographed cabinets, drawers, computers, and a neat stack of false invoices stored beside holiday wrapping paper and school forms. That part still makes me angry. False treatment invoices 3 feet from birthday ribbon. Dana interviewed Owen in the dining room with a trauma specialist present. Door open. Soft tone. No sharp questioning. She understood that after 5 years of engineered authority, even truth has to approach carefully. Ruth sat with Eli in the living room and let him color on the back of a utility bill while Child Services handled the first emergency placement paperwork. At one point I passed the hallway and glanced toward the back door. The path to the guest house was still visible. The hook where the bell had hung looked stupid now, just a small bare hook. That almost made me angrier than the bell itself. So much control, so much fear, built around things that looked small. By 1 in the morning, Marcus and Claire were gone, taken, processed, no longer in charge of that house. The guest house had been sealed. The main house had been restricted pending warrants and custody decisions, and Owen sat at my kitchen table in my house with Eli asleep against his shoulder because the child had finally burned through fear into exhaustion and folded into sleep. I stood at the sink and watched their reflection in the dark window. Owen looked older than 38, younger than the room had made him, both at once. Ruth poured herself what had to be her 5th coffee and said almost gently, "You realize this is the easy part." I turned. "Easy." Compared to today, yes, she was right, because arrest is not healing, exposure is not repair. Truth is not recovery. Truth is only the first honest floor. Still, I looked at my son at my table with his child asleep on him and thought, fine, then we build from there. The first night after Owen came out of the guest house, neither of us slept. I do not mean we slept badly. I mean sleep never really arrived. Eli woke twice in the guest room and cried without fully opening his eyes. Ruth stayed until almost 3 in the morning, checking doors and windows, like lies might crawl back in through the seams if she left too early. Dana called once after midnight to say Marcus had lawyered up, and Claire had moved from panic to strategy. Carver left a message about emergency protective custody paperwork for Eli and the temporary no-contact order that would hold through first appearance. And Owen sat at my kitchen table with a blanket around his shoulders, coffee in his hands, staring at the back porch like someone might ring a bell out there and make the whole night reverse itself. I did not push him. There are hours when talking is just a louder way of not understanding what happened. So I sat across from him with my own coffee and we listened to the refrigerator hum, the heater knock, and once around 2:10 the soft sound of Eli turning over in sleep down the hall. At some point Owen said, without looking at me, "I don't know what mornings are supposed to feel like." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He shrugged once under the blanket. "In there, mornings already belonged to somebody. The bell, the tray, the cards, the journal, the first sentence of the day was never mine." He let that sit for a second. "Now it's dark, and I still don't know what tomorrow is supposed to feel like when it belongs to me." Nobody trains fathers for questions like that. Nobody hands you the right answer to what freedom should feel like after 5 years of managed dependency. So I told him the only honest thing I had. Messy, probably. Strange, maybe disappointing at first. He gave one small nod. "That sounds right." At 4 a.m, I found him standing in the hallway outside the guest room where Eli slept, not peeking in, just standing there like he had wandered into the doorway and forgotten how to leave. "You okay?" He looked at the half-open door. "I keep thinking someone is going to tell me I haven't earned this view." That sentence stayed with me. Maybe it still has not left. The next days were practical in the ugliest possible way. Protective orders, emergency hearings, temporary placement, formal statements, medical review, therapy intake for Eli, medication analysis, search warrants on Marcus's office, search warrants on Claire's devices, search warrants on the condo, search warrants on the LLC. There is a particular kind of violence in bureaucracy after trauma. Everything gets assigned a number and a date while your life is still bleeding from the edges. Owen handled the first interviews better than I expected and worse than he wanted. That is the cleanest way to say it. He could stay clear through facts, dates, phrases, routines, the bell, the rewards, the journals, the room. But every time someone asked about Eli, something changed in him. His back tightened, his hands changed shape, his voice did not break much, but it became careful, like every word had to step through glass before reaching the air. The first full medical review nearly ended the week emotionally. Carver brought in a physician named Dr. Lena Foster, mid-50s, no-nonsense face, gentle hands, the kind of doctor who stopped confusing softness with weakness years ago. She went through the medications recovered from the guest house and built the first clear picture of what Marcus had actually been doing. Some of it had been real treatment early on. That made me sick in its own separate way. Sleep support, anxiety medication, short-term stabilizers, things that could make sense in a legitimate crisis. Then the pattern changed. Doses prolonged too long. Sedatives used situationally. Compliance shaped through medication timing instead of recovery markers. Off-label management built around predictability rather than healing. Predictability. That word again. Dr. Foster did not soften it. "This looks less like ongoing treatment and more like behavioral control disguised as treatment." Owen sat completely still while she said it. Then he asked only one question. Was I easier to keep in that room because of what they were giving me? She looked at him with the kind of honesty that hurts because it respects you too much to lie. "Yes," he nodded once. No dramatic scene, no breakdown, just a nod. That nearly broke me more than if he had collapsed, because there are forms of pain too deep for visible reaction. They just settle somewhere new and start rearranging the whole person from the inside. 3 days after the arrests, Eli asked if he could see the blue door. The request came over serial. "Can I see it now?" I looked at Owen. Owen looked at me. Then we both looked at Ruth, because by then she had somehow become the referee of every hard decision in my house. "Why do you want to see it?" she asked him. He pushed a soggy cereal loop around the bowl. "Because I want to know if it still works." "What do you mean by works?" He looked up. "Like if it can still keep people inside." Children sometimes say things so direct that every adult in the room has to pretend to be fine for a second. That was one of those times. We went that afternoon. Not dramatically, not alone, not illegally. Carver arranged supervised access because the property was evidence, and because some things need to become memory only after the law is done touching them. The house looked smaller after the arrests, less like authority, more like stage scenery. The guest house door had evidence tape across it. The yellow bell was gone, bagged, logged, photographed. Eli stood in front of the blue door holding my hand. Owen stood on his other side. None of us said anything at first. Then Eli asked, "Can it still keep people inside?" Owen knelt beside him. "Not anymore, buddy. How do you know?" "Because now everybody knows what it really was." Eli studied the tape, then the knob, then his father. "Can we make it not blue anymore?" Owen looked at me, then back at the door, then at Eli. "Yeah," he said quietly, "we can." That became one of the promises we started building around. No more bell, no more blue door. No more closed windows in family rooms. No more rewards tied to silence. No more journals written for permission. No more voices through walls. The criminal case moved faster than I expected and slower than I could bear. That is how serious cases usually work. Emotional truth arrives immediately. Legal truth laces up its boots and takes its time. Marcus's lawyer tried the first obvious move. Unconventional therapeutic environment. Voluntary home-based recovery. Distorted perception due to instability. Family stress misreading clinical judgment. That strategy did not survive the transcripts. No, you were never a danger to Eli. We contained a liability. Your father was a wallet with feelings. The child functioned as motivational structure. Care is just control with a conscience. We removed the conscience part years ago. Claire's first lawyer tried a different route. Paint her as a woman trapped under Marcus's influence. A spouse who went along because she was dependent and overwhelmed. That theory died once the logs and the financial timelines tightened. The bell routines, the tray pattern, the child leverage, the rewritten journal prompts in her handwriting, the boarding school line, the line about me being easiest when I was grieving and useful. Marcus had professional authority. Claire had domestic authorship. That distinction mattered. Natalie folded first, not morally, strategically. Dana called me the day Natalie agreed to cooperate and almost spat the word. Natalie admitted the stage scene, the blood pack, the fall, the argument script. Marcus's role in shaping the aftermath. Claire's role in deciding Owen was easier to maintain isolated than recovering. The money issues, the condo, the logic of turning my support into long-term income. What gutted me about Natalie's statement was not just what she admitted, it was how administrative it all sounded. Timelines, mailing addresses, billing structures, how much information to give me, how much child contact to allow Owen, how much sound from Eli would keep him compliant without making him hopeful enough to resist. There is evil that feels hot and wild. Then there is evil done with notes and coffee. Natalie gave us the second thing we needed most after the recordings: scale. The room had not been a panicked improvisation that somehow lasted too long. It had become a model. Maybe not for the world, but for them. A model they refined. The phrase she used in her cooperation interview made Dana stop writing for a second. We learned his thresholds, Natalie said. Once you know a person's guilt threshold and attachment threshold, the rest is maintenance. Thresholds. Like my son was pressure in a machine. After that, the state hit them harder. Fraud, conspiracy, false imprisonment, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, medical billing fraud, coercive control, child-related emotional abuse components, attempted legal leverage through capacity manipulation. Marcus lost his medical license before trial, interim suspension first, then emergency revocation. I wish I could tell you that felt satisfying. It did not. A license is paper, a room is years. Nothing they took from him came close to what he took from Owen. Owen's recovery outside the system was slower than the criminal case and more honest. That is probably the best way to say it. The law likes milestones, hearings, motions, discovery, trial dates. Recovery laughs at calendars. Some mornings Owen woke up and cooked eggs for Eli like he had always been there. Some mornings the sound of the toaster popping made him flinch so hard he had to step outside and breathe with his hands on his knees. Some afternoons he could sit in therapy and walk through memory clearly. Other afternoons he stared at my living room wall for 40 minutes because nobody had told him what to do next, and freedom still sometimes felt like falling without instructions. The first time he picked his own clothes at a store, he came back to the truck looking embarrassed. Too many options, he said. By then, that made perfect sense to me. The first time Eli asked if Dad could come to school night, Owen spent 2 hours deciding what shirt a normal father wore to elementary school hallways after 5 years behind a blue door. The first time he used a phone without asking, he kept checking the screen like it might report him. The first time he slept with his window open at my house, he woke up disoriented at 3 a.m. because crickets felt illegal. These are the things court does not really know how to count. Not just the years. The re-entry into ordinary life, one absurd detail at a time. Eli adjusted in circles. Children do not heal in straight lines because they were never broken in adult shapes. One day he would run into Owen's arms like no time had passed. The next he would ask, "Does Dad have to go back to the blue door if he gets too sad?" So we answered the same truths over and over. No. No one gets to put him there. No. Being sad is not a crime. No. Talking is not dangerous. No. Bells do not get to decide what families do. Ruth said repetition is how you replace bad architecture in a child's mind. I think she was right. By spring, Owen started coming to the shop with me 2 mornings a week. Not full days. Not at first. Just there. He stood near Bay 2 the first morning and looked around like he had walked into a church from his childhood and was not sure he was allowed back in. Everything smelled the same. Oil, rubber, metal, dust, bad coffee. Danny wiped one hand on a rag and walked over. "Good to see you, man. No pity, no performance. Just that." I loved him for it. The first week, Owen mostly handed tools and checked inventory. The second week, he corrected a torque sequence without thinking. The third week, I heard it. 3 short notes, a whistle, low and distracted, the old tune. I looked up so fast I banged my head under a lifted truck. He heard me and looked embarrassed. "Sorry, don't be." That did more for me than some of the court filings. Because it was not survival, it was habit, identity, him. The trial started 9 months after the arrests, long enough for everyone to harden, not long enough for me to stop hating the guest house in my sleep. I wore the same charcoal suit I wore to Evelyn's funeral because I had no interest in shopping for justice. Marcus looked smaller at the defense table than he ever had in my living room, not less dangerous. Just more accurate. Claire looked careful. Muted colors, soft hair, trying to look like a woman. Life had merely complicated rather than a woman who rang a bell to train a husband. Natalie testified separately under cooperation terms. I was grateful for that. Not mercifully, visually. The prosecution's case was not dramatic in the TV sense. It was methodical. First the room, photos, measurements, window latches, partition, medication storage, the bell, the cards, the journals, then the money, my transfers, the invoices, the LLC, the condo, the power of attorney draft, the timing, then the audio, the confessions, the justifications, the threat language, the child leverage, the wallet with feelings, the liability, then Owen. I will not describe every minute of his testimony because some parts still feel too much like trespassing. But I will tell you this. He was not the man from the guest house anymore. Not fully, not cleanly, but enough. He told the truth without borrowing Marcus's words, without speaking from inside the room, without apologizing for having been used. When Dana asked, "In your own words, what was that guest house?" he answered, "It was a place built to make me confuse obedience with safety." That sentence did more than 5 years of billing summaries ever could. It made the whole thing human in one breath. Then came Eli, not as a live witness. We fought that and won. No child should have to become an exhibit if the system can avoid it. Instead, the court used carefully handled forensic interview excerpts through child specialists, enough to show the bell, enough to show the fear, enough to show the drawings under the door, enough to show what he had learned to say softly. When the recording played his voice saying, "When the yellow bell rings, Dad has to be quiet," the room changed. Some truths do not need polish. They arrive small and blow the whole structure open. The defense tried everything predictable, Owen unstable, environment strange but consensual, therapeutic judgment misread by emotional family, Claire under Marcus's influence, Natalie convenient to blame. Then Dana stood up on rebuttal and read their own words back to them in sequence. "No, you were never a danger to Eli. We contained a liability. The child functioned as motivational structure. Your father was a wallet with feelings. Care is just control with a conscience. We removed the conscience part years ago. You do not recover from hearing your own morality read back to you like that." Marcus knew it. I saw it in his face. He had built a life on being the smartest, calmest person in every room. Now his own words had pinned him flat. The verdicts came after less than 6 hours. Guilty on the major counts, guilty on the exploitation counts, guilty on the confinement structure. Claire caught fewer top-line counts than Marcus because of charging structure. But enough. Enough by any honest standard. I did not cry when the verdicts were read. Neither did Owen. That surprised me at first until I understood why. Verdicts are for the public story. We had already been living the private truth for months. What moved me was not the word guilty, it was what happened after. The judge, a woman with silver hair and a stillness that made lawyers sit straighter, looked at Owen before recessing for sentencing submissions and said, "Mr. Reed, what happened to you was not treatment. Just that. Not treatment. No speech. No poetry. No big moral performance. Institutional language finally naming reality correctly. I think that helped him more than the convictions did, because law had once been one of the ghosts used to keep him still. Now, for one clean second, it named him correctly. Sentencing came later, and I will not pretend prison math heals families. It does not. But consequences matter because without them, the world starts teaching the wrong lesson. Marcus went away long enough that he will come out an old man if he comes out with anything worth having left inside him at all. Claire got fewer years, but enough that Eli will know her first as a story told carefully rather than a person with a bell in her hand. Assets were frozen. The condo was seized. Enough money came back through tracing and liquidation that Eli's future no longer depends entirely on my back surviving another decade of tires and transmissions. The guest house did not survive the next spring. Not because I raged at it, because we chose not to leave architecture standing where pain had learned our names. Before the property changed hands through cleanup and sale, I asked for one thing: the blue door. Once the legal process was done needing it, I took that door off myself. Not a contractor, not a deputy, me. It was heavier than it looked. Doors usually are. Owen helped me carry it to the truck. Halfway across the yard, Eli asked, "Are we throwing it away?" I looked at Owen, he looked at me. Then he said, "No, we're making sure it never gets to be a door again." So we took it to the shop, Bay 3, Saturday morning, no customers, just the three of us and Danny, because he would have been offended if I tried to destroy a symbol without him. We laid the blue door across 2 sawhorses. Eli stood back in safety goggles too big for his face. I handed Owen a pry bar. He stared at the door for a long second, then drove the metal under the hinge seam and pulled. The first crack of wood around old screws sounded strange, not triumphant, final. He pulled again, harder. Danny took the lower hinge, I took the frame edge. Together we broke the thing into pieces that could never close anything again. Eli clapped once when the biggest panel split through the middle. "Can I do one?" So I handed him a small rubber mallet and let him whack a loose strip until it snapped. "There, no more blue door," he said. Owen looked at him and answered, "No more blue door." That night, for the first time since the arrests, he slept 8 straight hours. Healing did not arrive in a big cinematic wave after that. It never does. It came in repetitions. Eli leaving drawings on the kitchen table instead of under wood. Owen answering them with notes in plain sight. The first time I found both pages clipped to the fridge with a wrench magnet and had to pretend I needed to look at the stove instead. It came in stupid little decisions. Owen choosing his own haircut, Owen closing the bathroom door and then reopening it because privacy no longer had to feel suspicious. Owen taking Eli to the hardware store alone for 20 minutes, then 40, then an hour, until ordinary errands stopped feeling miraculous. It came in conflict too. One afternoon, Eli slammed a toy truck into the floor and shouted, "You don't get to tell me what to do now just because you came back." The whole room went quiet. I was in the kitchen. Owen was on the living room rug helping him build with magnetic tiles. For one awful second, I thought my son would collapse into old guilt and let that sentence define everything. Instead, he stayed still and said, "You're right about one thing. I don't get to act like time didn't happen, but I still get to be your dad." Eli burst into tears. Owen did not retreat, did not over-explain, did not beg. He just stayed there. Later that night, I told him it was the best parenting I had seen in that house in years. He looked down at his hands and said, "It felt terrible." I nodded. That usually means it was real. A year after the arrests, Reed Auto and Tire had a new coffee machine. That sounds stupid after everything else, I know, but normal life gets rebuilt through stupid things. The old machine died in a puff of bad smell and bad timing. Eli said even the coffee machine wanted a fresh start, so Owen and I bought a new one. Nothing fancy, just better. By then, Owen was working 3 full days a week, doing books some afternoons, taking client calls when he felt steady, whistling more, laughing sometimes, still needing open windows some nights, still checking certain doors twice before bed, still having weeks where therapy left him brittle and quiet. Healing is not a straight line. I know people say that all the time now, usually in fonts that belong on greeting cards, but it is still true. Healing is not a straight line. It is a room you rebuild because you finally get to choose the walls. The final image I want to leave you with is not the verdict, not the arrest, not even the blue door breaking. It is this. One Sunday evening in early summer, almost exactly a year after Eli whispered to me at the zoo, the 3 of us were at my kitchen table. The windows were open, not for symbolism, because it was warm. Eli was drawing. Of course he was. Owen sat beside him helping with the wheels on a badly proportioned truck that somehow looked exactly right because Eli had drawn it. I was making spaghetti sauce the way Evelyn used to, which is to say with too much garlic and complete confidence. I looked over from the stove and saw Owen smiling at something Eli had said. Not the careful smile of a man trying to prove he was okay. A real one. Brief. Unmanaged. His own. Then Eli held up the page and said, "Look." It showed 3 people in front of a building with wide open windows. No fence, no bell, no little second structure in the yard. Just a garage with a sign, a house, and a large dog we did not actually own, but which had apparently become part of his ideal future. Across the top he had written, in crooked green letters, "No one gets locked in now." That was when I had to turn back to the stove and pretend the sauce needed all my attention, because there are moments too clean to survive direct eye contact. This whole story began with a whisper. "Grandpa, Dad is behind the blue door." I used to think the opposite of a lie was truth. Now I think the opposite of a lie is return. Return to your own voice. Return to your own child. Return to mornings that belong to you. Return to a table where nobody has to earn the right to sit. The law did its work. The evidence did its work. The recordings did their work. But the real ending happened smaller than all of that. A boy told the truth, a father finally listened, and a man came back from a room built out of other people's excuses. That is the ending I keep. That is the one worth telling.